Hi, folks. I'm Adrian Sanabria, the host of Enterprise Security Weekly. Every week, we interview the most interesting folks we can find, talking about the most pressing cybersecurity issues and challenges facing the enterprise today. Myself and my co-hosts have each been in the industry for decades, long enough to see the patterns in the industry and explore where trends are going. In addition to enterprise challenges, we also follow the vendor space, the most interesting security startups emerging, technology and product trends, all the most interesting funding and acquisition announcements. Finally, we love to discuss the latest trends in tech and how they'll impact cybersecurity. If you're wondering how the latest in AI, quantum computing, cloud, and DevOps is going to impact security a few years down the road, you should follow the Enterprise Security Weekly podcast.
Welcome back, everyone, to Paul's Security Weekly. Attend InfoSec World 2023 at Disney's Coronado Springs Resort, September 23rd through the 28th. Listeners receive a 20% discount when registering using the code ISW23-SecWeek20 at securityweekly.com/InfoSecWorld 2023. Also, make sure you subscribe to the Below the Surface podcast by Eclipsium, even.
What? The what now?
I don't even know what did I say?
Never mind.
No, I don't know. You couldn't even reproduce how I pronounced
I know I could, but I did choose not to.
Eclipsium, in partnership with CRA, myself and Scott Shefferman host the show. We've talked to some amazing guests coming up on September 13th. We're going to record the next season, as it were, with our very own Eclipsium Director of Research, Nate, Warfield. I have a tickle in my throat. I talk about something.
Okay. we'll definitely we'll talk about something here. Paul,
Eclipsium.com/podcast.
Yeah.
That's what
okay.
I meant to say.
All right. Perfect. You did it. All right.
Did it. All right. So now on to the security news. I think I wrote a lot about why Linux is better than Windows or why Windows is better than Linux. So I think that would be an appropriate place to start, other than introducing Dimitri, who has joined us here in studio. See, now, listeners, if you come hang out in the we're going to happen is after
we're going
to put you on the air. Like, you hang out enough, we're just going to put you on the air. That's actually how most people became hosts on the show. You hang out enough, we make you host. Dimitri, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
So we're going to start with why Linux is better than Windows, because it is, right?
Okay, next story.
Yep.
That wasn't too controversial.
I'll start with, I flagged a few articles here.
And wait a minute, Paul, are you vegan and CrossFit?
Yes.
Okay.
Because I run Arch Linux, by the way. By the way, is the best version of Arch Linux. Did you know that? If you're looking...
I thought I just saw Dimitri stand up together.
He's like, I'm out. That's it. So the first article is, if you're looking to up your desktop computer security, Linux might be your best bet. Now, based on this article, and actually my opinion is, I'm going with no on this one, because the author is missing the Linux is really just security through obscurity, largely, on the desktop side, in my not so humble opinion. It's not the most popular desktop operating system, less than 5% in most studies. The author presents some arguments as to why Linux is more secure than Windows, and every single one of them he gets wrong.
Oh, geez.
So first he says user permissions. Linux has a much more structured and sane permission system. I'm going with no. It does not.
Say that again?
It's the same permissions as Unix, right? It hasn't changed much, has it?
Well, there's file system permissions, which largely have not changed since the days of Unix. But what the author says is user permissions to more than things than just files.
But
right?
Is it fundamentally different from the way it was done in Unix?
There are other add-ons that have been modified the permissions model in Linux, if you will. But also, I think when we think of so I'll put it in context of this. Mm-hmm. With user permissions related to security, what we're really talking about is privilege escalation. Correct? I mean, that would be the type of exploit that you would typically do, right? Okay. You would escalate your privileges to get around your user permissions.
Well, this is why I'm asking the question, because I never saw it executed very well, but in theory, back in the old days in Unix systems, there was different levels and different, there was concepts of group membership, and
Correct.
The lower the number, root was 0, UID 0, and anything beyond that was not root. But somebody correct me, but
But the argument
1
is-
to whatever was a higher level privilege than 200, than 300.
The author
than
says
500.
Linux has a much more structured, insane permission system. I'm saying, comparatively speaking, from a security perspective, when we talk about structured, insane permissions, they're kind of on the same playing field. And so I link to a GitHub repository that has over a dozen ways to escalate privileges on Linux. And you know what? There's another dozen or more ways to do that on Windows. I think we're kind of on par user permission, so I'm putting that one to bed. Next, software installation. It says with Windows you can find exe and MSI files all over the internet, many of them carrying a malicious payload. With Linux, you are generally installing from your distribution's package manager, which is more secure. Completely disagree. Completely disagree.
Yeah, how often has that been broken into?
A lot.
Right.
Use the Windows App Store.
What's that, Sam?
I mean, you could just use the official Windows App Store and get the same result.
Correct. Well, also, I mean, Linux distributions, there's a lot of them, and you're trusting the Linux distribution and package maintainers to apply appropriate security controls for your Linux distribution.
And your package manager may not have the latest version, which contains all of the security fixes.
Or they may have backported a security fix and introduced new security vulnerabilities. Or, as Qualys researchers pointed out in 2022, package managers can also have vulnerabilities. Because it's not as of a tightly locked down system, well, we're talking about updates, as Windows Update. Because it's a more monolithic, centrally controlled system that Microsoft can secure. With Linux, it's 8 million distributions and a whole bunch of random people that you have to trust to make sure the software you're getting on Linux is, in fact, the software you should be getting and doesn't have vulnerabilities and or backdoors or hasn't been tampered with. So I think that argument is out the window. Next, open source. By design, the Linux code has been and can be vetted by thousands of software engineers.
Bullshit.
Like Heartbleed, they picked that up right before everybody got hurt.
We have debunked this original statement by Eric Raymond that with more eyes, bugs become more shallow, right? Something along that line. Linus gets attributed with the quote, but it was really Eric Raymond in The Cathedral and the Bazaar, actually, in his book, that he stated that. And it's not true. You can listen to the interviews that we did the first 2 months of this year on software supply chain and hear folks from the Linux Foundation. They're like, absolutely not true.
Yeah, and in the last 2 months we've talked about stories on the show where they've found bugs that have been in code for more than a decade.
Correct. Yeah, the pseudo bug was in that code for more than 10 years, I believe. Frequency. So the next, frequency of updates. Linux updates not only happen regularly, but when a vulnerability is discovered, it's fixed immediately. Not all the time and not always immediately, because the developer may patch the open source code. You go, hey, I found a vulnerability. The developer goes, all right, cool. I'll fix that vulnerability. But it doesn't get into the Linux ecosystem with magic. It gets into the Linux ecosystem when all the package maintainers for all of the distributions, for all the different software package repositories and ecosystems actually update their package so that you're getting the latest version of software. Of course, you could have also compiled that from source code, and if you don't recompile with the new patch, then you're still going to be vulnerable.
And don't
so
forget,
that argument's out the window.
And don't forget, some of the software that you may be installing on your system that's part of your production may be maintained by one person part-time as a volunteer in his mom's basement, right? So,
But he's got thousands of eyes, right?
He's got, everyone is reading the source code for utilities like sudo, making sure there's no security vulnerabilities.
wasn't that Log4j problem? Like, there's two guys that maintain,
and no one was looking at the source code for it,
except for those two people. Yep.
All right. So now on my story number 20, we're transitioning to when betting on Linux.
That was it.
That was just one story.
Oh,
I got like 3 stories on this line. So number 20, when betting on Linux security, look at the bigger picture. So this article brings up a couple of good points. Was this the
one with good points? All right.
This was a Linux Insider article that was talking about the previous article. Yeah. So story number 20, he or she, whatever, the author read story number 19, and then wrote story number 20.
Their name is Jonathan.
Thank you.
So.
And Jonathan says, when betting on Linux security, you got to look at the bigger picture. Jonathan says attackers go after Windows, or my take on that after reading Jonathan's article is that attackers go after Windows because it's deployed in the enterprise, and that's where they want to make money. It's not that Linux or Windows or Mac OS is inherently more or less secure. It's attackers are going after where they can monetize, and that's Windows.
Yep, and a big footprint with lots of money.
Linux
Isn't this the same argument essentially a generation ago when it was Windows versus Mac?
Yep. Correct.
Okay. Keep going.
So Linux is not necessarily attacked less in the data that's provided in story number 20 because they talk about malware and what operating system that it's targeting, but they're largely looking at malware like on desktop kind of things. If you look at how often Windows is attacked versus how often Linux is attacked, you have to take into consideration where Linux is deployed on servers and IoT devices.
Yep.
That often doesn't go, well, there's this many pieces of malware, then they're all written for Windows. This percentage is for Windows, this percentage is for Linux. That's not fair because most of the time it's on servers and IoT devices where you're not necessarily deploying malware. That malware is maybe not being counted. Also, attackers don't really need malware to attack Linux because all the built-in tools allow them to do the same thing that malware would do anyway. Now, that's my opinion. So that article wasn't bad. This story number 21, this one was not only bad, but just completely incorrect. Like the statements made in article number 21 just are not true at all. Like, and I only picked on one thing in here because I would need to sit with the author and explain some things, how things work in reality versus the fantasy land that they lived in when they wrote this article. So in the article it states, Microsoft Windows is vulnerable to viruses by its flawed design of allowing programs either all or nothing access. When you download and run a Windows.exe file, you have to trust the creator because it can do anything once it's run. That statement is false. Like it is what it is. That statement is absolutely, completely 100% not true. I linked to a Microsoft article that talks about that. But also there's what's the thing in Windows that control...
UAC?
What is it? UAC. Thank you. UAC, right?
Yeah. The elevation prompts and stuff.
Yeah.
UAC invalidates the author statement entirely.
I mean, his statement is true for like Windows 95.
Correct. I was going to say this article was written via ChatGPT that only had access to the internet in 19.
I linked to a
2001.
thing for Intune that you can control software permissions. EPM is what it's called. And there's lots of ways to do that in Windows. You can apply GPO. There's a lot of capabilities in Windows. Now, granted, not every organization uses all of that functionality and capabilities. And if they do, maybe not correctly. Let's put that aside for a moment. Windows has facilities to control permissions of processes and programs and services, I should say, in a Windows context. So, Linux also pretty terrible at this, by the way. If you've ever looked at Linux kernel capabilities, for example, which is a similar thing and determines what a process can do and what privileges that it has, is typically abused so that Docker container escapes can happen. That's just one example. I mean, there are lots of ways to skin that cat. That's just one example. And if you want more Linux privilege escalation, you should read my story number 22, where someone wrote a bash script that tries various known methods of Linux, I would say known methods of Linux privilege escalation, which I didn't get around to testing on my machine because I didn't trust the bash script smartly because it uses commands to pull things down from the internet, and then I would have to validate that. It tries like a bunch of different methods. And the first method I was like, yeah, and I'm just not running your script. Sorry. But I ran out of time to test it. But in reading the script that they have in this article, they are valid methods that some of them I am familiar with and have tested in the past. So
I'm just as I'm reading through stories here, I'm realizing we lost Sam.
No, Sam's still here.
Oh.
No, I'm still here.
Okay.
No, he's just not on the Foursquare.
Okay.
Those are my thoughts and opinions and kind of rebuttal to what was written. I don't know if anyone has anything else to add in terms of Linux versus Windows versus Mac OS security wise. I think the security is in the eye of the beholder.
Well, so I have a question. I was doing, I was thinking about the whole parallel between, Windows and Mac OS a generation ago, as I said, where the issue came up in the PCI world where there's a requirement to run antivirus. And in the early days, there wasn't antivirus available for Mac OS. And I'm talking, 20 years ago.
Because Macs don't get viruses.
Because Macs don't get viruses. I mean, that was the common...
That was the thing.
That was the thing. And I was like, I bet you it has something to do with, whatever the market share at the time was. 98% of the desktops and workstations were Windows. And it's just, I bet you if people started looking at it, it would change. So I was looking up the market share. And, for desktops, you said Linux is like 3%. And it's about 60% Windows, so I'm assuming the rest is Mac OS or some variant. But you flip it around and look at server market share, and 90 some odd percent of web servers are running on Linux.
Correct.
How does that factor into this debate of security? Looking at a Linux server versus a Windows server from a security perspective.
When we put in the context of web servers, though. Like typically, they're not necessarily attacking the operating system; they're attacking the web application,
the web application, or the web server application itself, and not anything else.
Yeah, not necessarily it's more the applications running on top of the operating system.
Yep. So you don't need to get to the OS.
It's an interesting point. Sometimes you really don't. It depends on what your goals. Nor do you really need malware necessarily. Like you can say, well, Macs don't get viruses or Linux doesn't get viruses. It doesn't mean malicious actors aren't breaking into these systems and doing things with them. They're just not like installing viruses or what we would deem, malware necessarily. They may have a kit. My recent incident that I did, I wouldn't say that what the attackers did is go, oh, they installed this kind of malware. They used a set of TTPs, if you will, that gained them a foothold on the system, was able to collect a certain amount of data, do some crypto mining, and that kind of thing. Wasn't really malware. I analyzed it, but I'm like, that's not malware. Those are just programs that are running with a specific purpose.
But was running there not because you put it there, because someone else put it there.
Someone else put it there. I believe this campaign was to mine cryptocurrency.
That's still a thing?
Yeah, that seems...
It is still a thing.
I mean,
why? I don't know.
It's got to be like some new
why not?
cryptocurrency,
I guess, right? But
I don't get it either.
And all right, so market share for web servers, largely Linux infrastructure. What's left these days? Most organizations that have internal networks, they're running Active Directory, so they're probably Windows-based desktops. So those are all Windows servers. Probably not a lot of Linux servers internally. File servers, database servers. I don't know what the breakdown is.
I think there's a large number of Linux servers that pop up across the enterprise. And I think a lot of that, too, is the cloud infrastructure. Like, oh, we don't run Linux. I'm like, but what did you spin up in EC2? Oh, yeah, it's Amazon Linux. We got a bunch of that. Right? And they may not interact as much at the operating system layer, like spinning it up. I know I put an application on there, and that's running an interface, but underneath it's Linux. So, same thing with IoT devices. We've got Mirai, which could be considered malware or worm.
I'd say
we'll call it a worm.
I would say worm and malware because
yes,
arguably it was used for bad purposes for doing distributed denial of service attacks.
I feel like that doesn't factor into when we see a lot of statistics on what's being attacked on which operating system. Are we taking into account the millions of systems that have been compromised by Mirai? And that's Linux too.
Yeah.
I guess I'm making the argument that like all the operating systems are vulnerable to crap, and attackers are taking advantage of it, and nothing is really more secure than something else at a certain level.
And that's an interesting distinction that we sort of were drawing about what constitutes malware. Like Mirai, we just talked about and said was malware because it was being used to do bad activity, to do like denial of service attack, distributed denial of service attacks. But yet, when we put cryptocurrency miner on a machine, that was software that was doing what it was intended to do.
Yeah.
And it wasn't doing bad things. But technically, it was trying to mine cryptocurrency and taking away your resources for somebody else.
I mean, technically, Back Orifice was a remote systems administration tool.
Oh, you're right. Right.
Or what we used to call a feature.
Yeah, it's a feature.
Right.
Right. Yep. Now, and that was interesting. Dimitri said, people still do that. I'm like, isn't mining cryptocurrency on like standard hardware, even if you have millions of devices in a botnet, like getting pecked to death by a duck? Like,
Yeah, it's
it doesn't. It seems. Yeah. Where's Tyler when you need him?
like we want creative attacks. Come on.
Right. No, I agree.
So the moral to the story is operating system, one is not more inherently secure than the other,
I agree with that statement.
or less secure than the other. So what are the reasons to buy one over the other?
It depends on your requirements and your use case.
It's not the security of the operating system.
And you
it's
go
the
with
motion of
market.
the
You
ocean.
go with what the market does, because the market's buying Linux for web servers. Let's do Linux web servers. I have to believe that's where the thought process is for a lot of organizations.
What about Chromebooks? Like, are Chromebooks the modern equivalent of the Mac that doesn't
Yeah.
need an antivirus?
I wouldn't. Yeah, I think
You know,
it's
like
just
think of an education setting. You know,
they do. Google has done a really great job with security, which is on Chromebooks, Chrome OS, and Chrome OS is based on Linux. It's kind of like if you were to envision what the Linux desktop would look like, you would create Chrome OS.
I'd agree.
They put it. But I think they've removed a lot of the customization and hands-on from the user, which inherently has made it more secure because they've removed the user's ability to do stuff, which also removes the attacker's ability to do stuff. Mm-hmm. And there's the security of Chrome OS is actually really good because it's tightly coupled to the hardware as well. Yep. Like if you want to modify the bootloader or the BIOS, you gotta like undo the screw. You gotta undo a physical screw.
Yep.
Yeah, it's similar to how Apple protects the boot process.
Yeah, there's actually a screw that actually grounds out the ability to interact with the bootloader.
Mm-hmm.
that's funny. My wife does technology at a school district, and so she got like stacks of Chromebooks on her desk, and sometimes I got to take one home and pry it apart now, I guess.
Yes, it is fun. Android too. I mean, Android is based on, but
Yeah.
I think both Android and Chrome OS have deviated a lot from what you would typically run on your core Linux desktop, and a lot of that is taking away a lot of the customization and controls that you would have as a user running a Linux. I mean, the reason you run Linux on a desktop is because you want all the control and the bells and the whistles, and you want to be able to go in and change stuff if you're so inclined, right?
Right.
Caution, you don't. You go down that rabbit hole, you could be, cutting off the branch you're standing on.
Yeah, but I got the 17 floppies to reload my Red Hat Linux, so I'm good.
You're good.
Now, think about the school district thing in the Chromebooks. When our kids still in elementary school and now in high school, but when they were going through elementary school, Chromebooks. In middle school, Chromebook. Now that we have one in high school, as soon as they move to high school, like, oh yeah, we got a new computer this year, and guess what?
Chromebook?
Windows. It's Windows.
Really?
Wow.
Yeah. Windows.
That's brave.
Yeah. And
not the browser. I mean, just brave in
exactly.
general.
And apparently, they first day of school today, and they had a big lecture in the auditorium from the principal, and apparently, one bad apple ruined it for the whole bunch. That you're no longer allowed to change your desktop backgrounds on Windows anymore.
That's a group policy object.
Oh, I thought you
Yeah.
meant somebody brought in a Mac.
And honestly, it's crazy that they have laptops that run Windows because the entirety of the work that they do is in the Google ecosystem.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense. But so my story number one is related to that. Chrome Sync Privacy is still really bad. And I suggest after reading this article that you review your Chrome settings, because if you go into your Chrome, so now the article talks about first, like when you first get prompted, like, hey, do you want to log into your Chrome browser using your Google account? And you're like, yeah, cool, I'll do that. And then Google asks you, do you want to sync your settings so no matter what Chrome browser you're logged into with your Google account, I can sync all of your bookmarks and all of this stuff? And you're like, yeah, I want to do that. And then you should create a passphrase, although it's kind of garbage. Don't really take it for security reasons because it's really easy to to decrypt it. I think you and I, Larry, both decrypted that. But also, the other thing it does, it doesn't tell you this in the process. It basically says, hey, anything you type in the URL bar, we're just going to send that to Google so we can analyze it and make for a better experience on the internet for you.
Anything that you type into the what now?
The URL bar at the top. And it will differentiate between, so there's different settings for, because I dug into my Chrome browser, different settings for improved search suggestions is one of them. When you type in the address bar or search box, I guess it's all the same thing as the
same
URL
thing
bar.
now.
Yeah.
Chrome sends what you type to your default search engine to get better suggestions.
The same thing that you do that when you hit enter at the end of your search term?
Yes. Well,
wait. But it does it before you hit enter?
this is just one of them.
Okay.
So it says Chrome sends what you type to your default search engine to get better suggestions.
So it's
what you type in
keystroke
the
monitoring.
address bar or search box. That could be anything. So if you're not intending on searching, if you're typing an internal URL, it's going to send that. That's one. But that's one thing. The
Or if
other
you're
thing-
jotting a note.
the other thing that it does.
Exfiltrate data.
There's another setting that is make searches and browsing better, is what it's titled. What it does, sends URLs of pages you visit to Google. Yes.
All right, that one's kind of shitty.
Yep.
But don't they already have that?
You can turn it off, but it's turned on by default. And not very clear when you go through the process the first time that that's what's happening.
Because if you're
basically.
browsing a lot of internal stuff, then they're getting URLs. There could be sensitive stuff in those URLs and the parameters.
But doesn't Edge do the same thing on Windows? Every URL you type in is set up to a cloud service to see if it's known malicious. The people got upset when Windows 10 came out about this.
Oh, yeah. I'm not. Yeah, I wouldn't
I
necessarily.
use Firefox. Where's my typing going?
I haven't looked into Firefox and see what. I don't.
That's a great question,
know.
Jeff.
I don't know.
Wow.
Firefox tends to be different in the way it treats all of this stuff because it's
Firefox, which used to be Netscape, which used to be Mosaic, which was the
that's a
original
whole
browser.
episode in and of itself.
Just I've always.
But anyway,
Wait, so what's the engine under Firefox now?
Is it still Mozilla?
Is it still
It should be
Mozilla,
Mozilla. It should still
or
be
is it?
Mozilla.
Do they just call it Firefox?
Or is it like? Because I know some of the other browsers are like Brave and all this stuff. It's the Chrome engine underneath.
I mean,
Everything kit, I think.
WebKit.
WebKit. Okay.
Even Edge is a WebKit now, isn't it?
No, it's Chrome.
Yes.
Chromium.
Yeah,
Chromium,
but one of the things in the prompt is
Jesus.
Google may personalize search and other services based on your history. So Google's essentially collecting your data in this process and using it to customize your experience, and it's shady, basically. And you can turn all of that off, and you should read this article and then go turn all that stuff off.
But I've been getting really good ads for Bamboo 3D printers lately.
Well, yeah, there's that. Then there's that. Right.
It'll be here tomorrow.
Firefox is still Mozilla, as far as I know.
Yes, it's Mozilla Foundation.
So they're getting all the things I
Potentially.
type. But what are they doing with it?
I don't know.
I think this is
I
an
don't think it's-
endorsement for
Yeah,
Firefox.
could be.
I don't think you can log into Firefox.
You can.
So
You
I
can.
I don't think
Yeah.
it's harvesting everything because it doesn't have this synchronize across devices feature. That's what
It
it's all
does.
about.
If you if you create an account in Firefox, it can do that, Sam.
Interesting.
Yeah.
It's been so long
But
since...
I'm not sure how they. But again, very different from Google. Like Google's using that data to like customize your experience, which is shady. Which could also mean who knows what they're doing. Are they selling it? Are they bargaining your data in the back end? With Firefox, I feel like you're just, from what I've read, you're creating an account, and so they store your account information, and I'm not sure how they're syncing your data.
Well,
but
I'm going to tell
they're
you...
not a commercial entity like Google that could be using it for other means.
I'm going to answer your question. That
Yeah.
what is Google doing with all that data? They selling it? Well, how much did you pay for Chrome?
I paid for it with my data.
Yes, you are the product.
Right.
Right. So, yeah, of course they're selling it.
So I guess that means a law enforcement agency could subpoena Firefox or Microsoft or Google and get a list of all your URLs and search history from them.
You could encrypt that with a passphrase, so it would be stored encrypted. In this case, when you do it in Google, it is encrypted when you apply the passphrase. But it's very.
But they're
the
also
last I
storing the
checked-
passphrase.
Wait a minute. Now, the whole point is if I search for something in Chrome on my laptop, and then I go to my other computer that's logged into the same account, it'll synchronize the bookmarks.
Correct.
So that means the server must have it unencrypted to pass it to the next device.
On my devices, I have any device I do, I have to enter my passphrase in order for it to sync.
So effectively the same decryption keys on both devices.
Correct.
But you think that just because you have a passphrase, that Google isn't monetizing it?
Oh, no, I don't believe that at all.
Okay.
Because of these other mechanisms, it's not encrypted. It's sending my URL. In other words, if I have the option, it's sending all the URLs that I type or access in the URL bar. It's sending those in clear text. That's what the article says. Sends those in clear text. That's not part of my personal data sync. That's another thing that Google has layered on and through weird user prompts enabled by default.
And I mean, and then I'll question, like, what does that sending it in clear text really mean? Yeah, they're taking the data and they're sending it in clear text, but they're sending it over an encrypted channel. So are they really sending it in clear text?
I don't know.
Yes, by definition.
It's in the
Doesn't mean you can intercept it because
Right.
it's an encrypted channel, but it is clear text.
Fair enough. Okay.
So it's potentially susceptible to man-in-the-middle attacks, hijacking attacks.
Yep.
Oh, he does talk about Firefox Sync at the end of the article here.
Oh, what's it say?
Firefox Sync was built with privacy in mind. It was encrypting all data from the very start by default.
I somehow feel vindicated that I still use Firefox. Just saying.
No, for privacy reasons, it is.
I get it.
Michael Bazell recommends Firefox.
Because when I read those, do you want to sync? Do you want to do all this? I always say no.
Yeah.
I don't want to do all that.
So I got to tell you, Jeff, about a little over a year ago, I was using Firefox pretty much exclusively until all of a sudden my banking website refused to work in Firefox. And I would literally have to like clear all of my settings in Firefox every day I wanted to log into my banking website.
Yeah, I have definitely encountered that type of problem numerous times.
And so I switched to Chrome full time, and then it started doing the same thing in Chrome. So I don't access my banking website in either Firefox or Chrome. I use Safari because that's the only web browser it works in.
I feel like that's your bank's problem.
Yep. And then doing any sort of web app pen test work, like Chrome has done such a good job about cross-site scripting remediation and all this type of crap when you're trying to do that with Chrome. Firefox.
I think we should talk about
The original browser.
firmware next.
Well, why not?
Well,
It's your show, and you work for
I think
Eclipsium.
I think we should probably hear from some Jeff and some Sam stories in here. No offense there, Paul. I mean, I know it's Paul's Security Weekly, but geez.
Sam or Jeff, did you have any stories on firmware security?
Wow.
No?
I do not.
Okay.
Is it
Yes.
What's that? Number
I have
6?
no firmware.
No.
Actually, no, you do.
Number 5.
Busybox CPIO vulnerability.
That was an interesting one. I know. I almost added that one, but Sam, you had it.
Yeah. I mean, I've just caught my attention because it's Busybox. And of course, I use Busybox on Android and everything. It's the easiest way to get a bunch of useful Linux tools. And so they found a simple directory traversal in CPIO, which is a decompression utility. And the problem is they can't get it fixed. This gets me into the supply chain issue. They can't reach the developer and they can't reach the package maintainer.
But
So
wait,
they
the
just-
article that I read earlier, Sam, said that all open source vulnerabilities are fixed pretty much immediately.
That's what it said, isn't it? It's as if somebody was an idiot.
That's interesting. I didn't read that aspect of it. I had too many stories and I had to cut some.
Yeah.
But I love that from a open source insecurity and supply chain insecurity perspective. They can't reach the developer to fix the issue. And what Busybox just includes it upstream.
So to give some of our
Or
listeners a
downstream?
little bit of
Downstream.
background, Busybox is a monolithic small application that is helpful on small, what we would have referred to as embedded devices, IoT, Android, and so forth.
You determine the size of Busybox.
Exactly.
It can be
You decide.
small, relatively speaking, it could be small or it could be large.
Right, but that admittedly so, it is still smaller. So Busybox replaces all of the common Unix utilities that you've come to know and love. In many cases with semi-neutered versions that they are not fully featured. They do sometimes in many cases bare minimum. So by that, they are smaller than including 300 utilities that have 700 different options each. They are 300 utilities with 200 options each. So reduce code space, a single monolithic binary to provide all of these services. And like Busybox is like the de facto standard on I don't know how many Linux distributions for IoT.
Oh, yeah.
And the fact that they cannot get a hold of the Busybox maintainers to fix this is fucking terrifying.
That's because the CPIO code is not maintained by the Busybox maintainers.
I don't care. They can't get a hold of the Busybox maintainers.
Because they're downstream of the CPIO code.
Doesn't SBOM solve all this?
No.
Well SBOM would tell you if you had a vulnerable version of CPIO on your system, whether it was included in Busybox or not, right?
But the point being here is I don't care if it's a problem with CPIO. It's implemented in Busybox, and they can't get a hold of the Busybox maintainers.
The Busybox maintainers or the CPIO maintainers?
Busybox maintainers. Initial contact of Busybox maintainer via email.
That makes more sense.
Second try to contact Busybox maintainer. First try to contact developer, the module email bounce first to Debian security team because Busybox package is via Debian packages. No contact at all, apparently.
So that makes
who the hell's maintaining Busybox?
That is used every freaking where. Sorry.
God, Sam.
It shows that they aren't keeping the Busybox stuff up to date. And so who knows how old the stuff you're getting from Busybox is. I mean, even like the Ubuntu repositories, you install stuff, you're getting stuff that's pretty badly out of date, but there's no reason to imagine that Busybox isn't even worse.
That's interesting.
Wow. I think this is a bigger deal than maybe it got made out to be. What did this? I
want to start asking around now.
What is the CVE severity level on this one? And I'm leading you into another story.
Yes,
here, Paul.
you are.
I don't think he gives it the score, but since you can write arbitrary files to arbitrary locations, you just have to write a config file or something, and it will be ultimately executed. So, in principle, remote code execution.
9.8. Only because that's what they assigned to the other story that I had.
The article says 6.1. Says right at the top, summary.
Does it? So CVSS version 3 has non-applied base score. Same with CVS. It's not yet been scored by NVD.
Version 3, it's a 6.1.
Really? Where?
Top of the article. Summary.
But I'm looking at NIST, NVD, and CVSS is not applicable.
I'm looking at the article.
Well, they got the calculator.
You don't need a license to score to do a CVSS score.
No, you don't.
By the way, you need a license to drive a car. You don't need a license to be a parent, but you don't need a license to calculate a CVSS score for a vulnerability.
But they'll let any butt-reaming asshole be a Busybox admin.
Yeah.
Right. You don't need a license to be an open source maintainer either, Jeff.
So what article are you looking at,
what movie
Jeff?
were we quoting, Larry?
What movie was that?
Parenthood.
Oh my God!
Keanu Reeves.
It was Parenthood.
Absolutely.
So we watched that recently. It's a great movie.
So how the hell did they determine
They would not
in the
make
article?
that movie today, by the way, if you've gone back and watched it.
How the hell did they determine in the Pentagrid article that it was a 6.1 medium when NVD has not scored it at all?
Because NVD is just one body that scores vulnerabilities. You could be we talked about this, Microsoft can score their own vulnerability with bias. Anyone could go score a vulnerability and say,
in fact, PCI encourages you to score your own vulnerabilities based on your own risk ranking criteria.
Which isn't a bad,
right.
It's a great idea. Yeah. Nobody does it.
This is why CVSS version 4 is helpful.
Says it's this. Qualys says it's this. So
and this is why CVSS version 4 is helpful.
But I think the VM providers provide their own score. I don't think it's a CVSS calculation, right? They'll read in the calculation from NVD, but also they have we had our own calculation.
Tenable had its own
their own calculation. But we also let users modify, to PCI's point, we let users modify the Tenable calculation for that if you had a compensating control or you had a configuration.
Recasting or
recasting risk. is what they.
If your vulnerability management supervisor is so smart, why is he sitting in the neighbor's car?
You can go to NIST's website, the NVD.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
There's a calculator.
There's a calculator.
There's a
Yeah.
calculator.
Yeah.
And you can just plug in just
Whatever values
any
you
value you want, and it'll spit out a score.
Yeah.
It doesn't. I think what ends up happening is some theoretical expert has to be the arbitrator to say, oh well, this one is actually an adjacent network attack vector, not a local attack vector.
Got it.
And that's where the score comes from.
Arguably, Pentagrid calculated their own CVSS score as a 6.1
Based on available.
Yet
evidence.
NVD has not officially scored it yet.
Probably, yeah.
Okay, fair.
Now,
Fair enough.
but you got to go to CVE 2020 19909 to find everything that is wrong with CVEs. This is my story number 14.
I read this, and this is
like I'm at a loss for words as to the shenanigans.
I'm at a loss for words for two things on this one.
More, I mean,
The first one being that curl is maintained by one guy.
no, it's a team. I mean, this may be one of the guys, but it's a team.
Oh, this is the guy.
It's the so open source developer and
Curl maintainer.
Open source developer and curl maintainer.
This is the guy.
It's the guy. Now, curl. Think about how many command line options there are for curl.
Yep.
But now every command line option is potentially unstructured, right? Or is, I should say, unstructured user input. Think about where a lot of software vulnerabilities come from.
Unstructured
It's
user
the
input.
processing of user input. And curl has, I meant to actually go count for this story. Like, I don't know if it's a fair assessment to run curl through to like -- help and go to like WC-L. Yeah, that's not helping. Yeah.
I was going to say, I got 17 lines on the Mac.
You got 17, but it has a lot more than
It
that.
does.
Oh, this is not the full help. The menu is stripped into categories. This is a help category or help all. And then go to
250.
250. I got 256, but there could be other lines
There
above
are.
the. Yeah. Roughly 250 command line options to curl, one maintainer, 250 entry points for user data. That's a lot of responsibility. I think it was the Open Source Security podcast with Kurt and Josh that was talking about this problem with curl, and I want to give them credit for kind of putting this in context of like, oh, good Lord. Now let's go to the article. So Daniel is the maintainer of curl, and like, where do you start in the story? The story is just, God, good. So someone found a
CVE reported from 2020 showed up, and there's no comment on it about the curl website, because curl effectively will take a report of a vulnerability and give it their own curl identifier, curl vulnerability identifier, and then we'll submit it for a CVE.
I will say it seemed to me, Larry, in just your first description, which is spot on, that Daniel has a great process for dealing with and processing bug reports and also vulnerability reports. And Daniel takes them very seriously. Make sure that they're addressed. Make sure everything is communicated. Like, because I read not just this article, but also the article that he published on the curl website, and knowing what I know about curl and having heard about previous, vulnerability, they are addressed. Like, there's a process for it. It's not like Microsoft where you got to convince them to fix something. Daniel just fixes it, right? Like, he gets the process down, and he fixes it.
Which was a bit of a shock when he found out that someone else had submitted a CVE and it wasn't.
So the story starts with there's a CVE out there that is affecting curl that Daniel doesn't know about.
Right.
Like,
didn't know about it until it was like, hey, what?
Like, what are you talking about?
Daniel, what the hell? Why haven't you fixed this? There's nothing about it on the curl website.
And he was like, I didn't know about it.
Right.
Someone report. But the interesting part is it has a 2020 CVE moniker.
Yep. Which is you typically are getting a.
Now I have to see if there's a plugin for it at Tenable.
You typically get that
It'd be interesting if
during the year in which it was discovered, unless it was like backported.
Right. That is one of the issues with maybe this does uncover a lot of almost all the issues with CVE, because it's one of my gripes is, let's say I discover a vulnerability in a piece of software today, right? And the company I report it to that owns the software, they recognize it, and they issue a 2023 CVE. But the company goes, I need more time to fix it. We can't talk about this publicly. And I go, okay. And we get into this multi-month long kind of debate. And I'm like, we got to notify customers. We got to fix this. It's going to take us longer to fix this than we anticipated. Okay, now it's 2024.
Yep.
In February 2024, right? Their Valentine's Day present to Paul is
CVE 2023.
CVE 2023 something. It comes to the security community at large, and we go, oh, that's not new. That's old, and we get confused.
Yeah,
but
we've had 2023. We already patched that.
Yeah, but but it is new because the number. That whole situation, I think, is bad. I think there should be something in
the number. The number is assigned when it is submitted, not when it is
approved
or published.
So they're published before they're confirmed.
It's recorded.
And then can't you like pre-configure or pre-reserve?
You can pre-allocate.
You can pre-allocate. Yeah. Like
whatever.
Microsoft, for example, has a number of pre-allocations from MITRE of CVEs, and those two also contribute to this problem.
That kind of reminds me of the movie. What's it called? Come back to me in a minute.
Back to the Future?
No.
Oh.
The one with John Travolta and he steals a nuke. And
Broken Arrow?
Broken Arrow. And the line in that movie where it's like, I don't know what's more disturbing, that we have a broken arrow or that you have a term for it.
Oh,
right.
Yeah.
I was thinking of Staying Alive, but
all right.
Different Travolta movie.
You weren't even born when that movie came out.
CVE.
Pulp Fiction.
Better.
CVE.
There is no Tenable plugin for this CVE, by the way.
Okay. So, but we're still on the CVE thing. We've only yet scratched the surface with this bug in CVE. So, we're continuing down the timeline is weird because again we got a 2020 CVE. It was published in 2023.
Yep.
Which is weird in and of itself.
Like a week ago. Yep. So.
And Daniel's going, I've never seen this before, until he's like, I have seen this before. Right? Because
but so it was published a week ago, and it basically says that there's an integer overflow vulnerability in tool operate C in curl 7.65.2 via crafted value as the retry delay, and it was assigned 9.8 critical by NVD.
That must mean it's really bad.
Yeah.
We should all panic.
Usually that's what it means.
So now Daniel says, hey, that language seems very familiar.
But isn't part of what makes it 9.8 the fact that
Larry's got a good handle on it. He's articulating this better than I can.
So Daniel goes and says, I've got a good... that language sounds very familiar. So he goes back and looks and finds that a gentleman by the name of Jason Lee dropped an issue to HackerOne that was an integer overflow problem in curl's retry delay, which accepts a number for how long you're going to delay for a retry.
For a retry, right. And it's in seconds, but it gets converted to milliseconds in the curl code. Yep.
And by multiplying by 1,000. So that's how long curl should wait before retrying. And turns out, depending on whether you're a 64-bit or 32-bit system, like Windows 32-bit long integers, if you set that number really big, it wraps around.
Right.
So if you set it to this huge number on a 64-bit machine,
it'll wait for a short amount of time.
It could wait for a very short period of time. The example he gives, it would be until the end of time, but because it wraps around, it's 384 seconds.
Okay, let's stop at this point. I think that's a bug, not a vulnerability.
Yes.
Okay. Bugs are vulnerabilities.
Are we going to go into the difference between the two?
Bugs are vulnerabilities. My question was, isn't part of the scoring at least it was maybe I'm thinking of the Tenable algorithm that we use, but whether there's known exploits in the wild, whether this is already known to be being exploited, doesn't that contribute to the score?
I think so, but it depends on which version of the scoring and
I would think it was. It's more than what's the difference between 9.8 and 10.0.
Right, but there's also in
which
the 30...
makes me think that the scoring is bogus.
But now in the 32-bit long case on Windows, you can it will translate to roughly 25 days.
Right.
So it goes in the opposite direction because of like math, basically.
And Daniel's comment right in the article: a bug, sure; security problem, no.
That's my point. A bug, sure; security problem, no.
No. And Jason, the original submitter in 2019, was told exactly that: security problem,
And
no.
Jason was like,
bug,
you know what, cool. And Jason may have been the person that fuzzed all of the curl inputs. I feel like there was someone that fuzzed all of the curl inputs, because like, why not? I mean, I guess if you're bored on a Saturday, that's what you do.
And in the in 2019, Daniel submitted a pull request, fixed the bug, credited Jason, and curl 7.66.0 has the fix in it.
Released in September of 2019. Right, because right now we're on curl. My curl is 8.2.1. So if you have exploits for that, do not send them to me.
Let me.
That's what I have. I updated my system today, so let's see how your mileage varies. But the story continues, Larry.
The story continues.
We've got this bug that's been fixed in 2019, but we've got a 2023 2020, which was published in 2023, which is a 9.8 critical score on it for a bug that
for a time delay
that has been fixed, which a bug also in the first place is not really a security problem. Right? We can debate bug versus vulnerability on another show, but this is not a security problem.
Yeah. And
I trust Daniel's assessment of this.
Yeah, I love his conjecture is that likely whoever received this and scored it at NVD
had no idea what they were talking
about and keyed on the specific language of integer overflow vulnerability.
Because integer overflows are bad and can be exploited, and therefore
and that it says integer, those three words together, integer overflow vulnerability.
Well, you know,
9.8.
The good news is if you go to NIST, the CVE is undergoing reanalysis and is being disputed.
Which
yes,
update number 2.
Yeah, don't get ahead of ourselves.
Update number 2
is part of the story. We're getting to that point.
Yep. So
I always flip to the last
I have a question.
chapter.
I have a question.
So Daniel has objected, and Ubuntu marked it as not affected.
Right.
And MITRE denied his request to reject the CVE.
Right.
So while it's under review, MITRE's already told him, piss off.
But it's not under, what is the terminology that Jeff used? So right now, where it stands, based on everything that Daniel has like requested and the saga of this story, is that when you go to the National Vulnerability Database, CVE 2020-19909, says undergoing reanalysis at the top.
Yep.
This vulnerability has been modified and is currently undergoing reanalysis. Please check back soon to update the vulnerability summary. My question, and I don't know the answer, maybe someone does, maybe someone from one of the top 3 vulnerability scanning vendors can answer this question. Maybe you don't want to answer this question. I can
think of one.
If I was still there, I don't know if I would. Maybe I would. It'd be.
What would Renault say?
I would love to know the answer to this question. I don't want to say that if I was at Tenable, I wouldn't want to answer this question, because I would, and I would push the team to go. We need. If the answer is we don't know, but in terms of I'm Rapid7, Qualys, or Tenable, right? And I've got this CVE 2020-19909, and in NVD it's marked on their website in yellow, undergoing reanalysis. Now, when we pull this information from NVD and we do, or Tenable, Qualys, Rapid7 does their analysis of that, does it take that into consideration? Do any of the 3 VM vendors go, hey, we found CVE 2020-19909, we're going to rank this as a low severity given that it's undergoing reanalysis? Is that reanalysis flag passed through in the system to all people who consume CVE data to go, well, not really a vulnerability yet, or it's in dispute? Like, there needs to be a flag for that.
You know what question I'm going to ask tomorrow at work, right?
Yeah.
Because we pull that in. We pull that data in for Vex. And
Dimitri.
So think about this. How often does this kind of situation happen? Hopefully not a lot, right? I mean, well, I'd hope. But in my experience, and again, I haven't worked inside of Tenable, but a lot of this stuff they're telling me is like just kind of automated for some of the checking. So how likely is it that someone's going to pick up on one vulnerability that's got some dispute going across it before it gets pushed out? Isn't everyone in a race just be like, the most
but there's no
protections?
plugin for this.
So maybe they've already done the. So I will say, Dimitri, to answer Dimitri's question, Jeff, I worked very closely with the plugin writing team at Tenable, and this was a long time ago. So I'm not speaking to how Tenable operates today. I'm talking probably not quite 10 years ago, but maybe 8 or so. Right. The team was very diligent about scrutinizing everything. That there were automated.
There was a human involved.
There are automations that happen.
There was absolutely humans involved,
and there was absolutely humans involved, and humans would be hyper aware of this. Smart humans would be that are hyper aware of this kind of situation. In that, evaluating the validity of the check in multiple perspectives. In other words, when I was at Tenable, I'd have a high degree of confidence that when this came across their desk, as it were, even if we're a part of an automated check, they go, "Wait a minute, I want to dig into this one a little bit."
What? No way.
Yes, that's exactly what it would be.
Fuck's sake.
Yeah.
Sorry. Yep. All credit where credit is due to the what no way guy.
The what no way guy. Whatever. Yeah. He's a social media guy, TikToker, Instagram guy. Yeah.
He's like a mechanic and handyman fix-it guy, and like people send in things about like, if you use a zip tie to plug this thing into here and do this, and he's like, what? No way.
Like if you have two buckets, you know the buckets you get from Home Depot when they're stuck together? If you get your compressor and you shoot some air in it, they separate.
Okay, I know.
What? No way.
And he goes and tries it. And
like,
it's like Mythbusters.
And then he tries it and he's like, fuck's sake.
Yeah. That's exactly what like the Tenable team in my assessment would do.
What?
They'd be like,
no way.
And then they'd be like, you know what? No, we're not publishing a plugin for this. Like, yeah.
The best part is that both of our kids say that in the house now because they've seen enough of those videos.
So this is like a lot of things that are wrong with CVE.
And so one of the commenters from Willie, there's a little bit here from being on the Linux kernel security list. I can see that there are reporters who just are seeking a CV ad to line on their CV, which is why I'm calling CVE Curriculum Vitae Enhancer.
Yes, yeah.
Like, oh, Jesus Christ.
Well, no, we saw that with the research from the university that was trying to get pull requests added to the Linux kernel to add backdoors and deliberate vulnerabilities into the Linux kernel.
So they can
a lot of the Linux
CVs.
Kernel maintainers, very similar to the Tenable plugin writers that I worked with, would scrutinize that and go like,
"What? No way!
No way! Like, no, that's not. You're not doing that. No." So it's good.
So out of curiosity, I just Googled undergoing reanalysis, NIST. There's quite a few out there.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I don't know what the
percentage of all
what the percentage is, but there's a lot that are being reviewed, and by a lot, I'd say a couple dozen.
It's just super interesting, I think, the way this whole
You know what would be
thing
awesome?
unfolded.
To get Daniel on the show.
Yes,
That would be awesome, Daniel.
would be. We can work on that.
What else we got?
WinRAR. I want to
Again.
revisit WinRAR because I think I was like, oh, it's a vulnerability in WinRAR. Like, we should talk about that. And
I think I had an article about WinRAR
You did?
and PCI.
In PCI.
No,
Oh,
I'm just
good.
kidding. I'm
No.
just kidding.
Well, we should talk about it in the context of PCI.
We should.
Because, you get that file full of credit card numbers. You got to compress it in some way.
That's right.
And then send it over clear text somewhere.
Because that's encryption
It's encrypted.
or
Yeah.
masking. There was one article I looked at today, and I couldn't even put it up there because they were talking about data masking being essential, and data masking being done with encryption and other methods. I'm like, that's not masking.
No.
Anyway, it didn't make the cut.
So this talks about WinRAR as a 0-day, but I want to say WinRAR is aware of it and fixed it, so I don't necessarily classify it as a 0-day. Maybe before
When you fix it, it's no longer a 0-day?
When you patch it, it's no longer a... Anyway, let's table that discussion for right now. But the WinRAR was being exploited via poison JPEG and text files. And the way that they were doing that, because we were talking about it last week and wanted to put some more color. So they were exploiting a vulnerability that allows them to spoof file extensions. So they're able to hide the launch of malicious code within an archive masquerading as a JPEG, text file, or any other file. They create a zip archive containing malicious and non-malicious files. The victim opens it. The victim will see an image file in a folder with the same name as the image file. When they click on the air quotes image file, it's actually a script that is being executed. And that was like basically it. Like, no wonder attackers were taking advantage of it, because it's super easy to exploit. And so we were debating, I think last week, how does it work? Well, obviously you have to expand. It's not a RAR file. I believe it was a zip file that they're using WinRAR, because it says they create a zip archive containing malicious and non-malicious files, because I believe RAR files by nature do not create an archive of multiple files and then compress it. And that's one of the differences between zip and RAR. Then there's the compression algorithms that are used by the various kind of file formats. But that's one of the major differences between, for example, a zip on Windows or Mac OS and a gzip on Linux. Zip on Windows or Mac OS can create that file archive and compress it. On Linux, if you use gzip, it's why you have to create a tar archive to create the file archive of multiple files
you're
and
using
then compress
words
it.
I'm familiar with. I was going to ask,
Yes.
does Linux still have tar?
Yes, correct.
There's still
So
a
it's
tar ball.
tar ball is what we call it.
Yeah.
And that's due to the limitations of the various...
Well, there's various algorithms or methods or philosophies maybe for data compression. And this goes way back.
There's we call it zip, would be like, I'm going to zip that. But depending on which platform you're on, it's going to use different compression algorithms underneath. So deflate is what's used on Windows and Mac OS. Gzip, it uses deflate, but in like a different way where it cannot compress multiple files. But deflate is also a combination of like two other compression algorithms. We could do like a whole... we could do like a multi-hour... We could basically spend an entire day talking about the history of compression algorithms and file formats.
But let's sum up.
That's what I'm trying to do here.
Yeah.
And so tar, again, is what allows you to create the archive. Gzip applies to compression. Bzip 2 uses a different... we talked about bzip, I think, is one of the alternatives, right? It uses the Burroughs-Wheeler algorithm, which is a different compression algorithm. And then, of course, there's my favorite, which is the middle-out compression algorithm from the show Silicon Valley, which was a completely fictitious compression algorithm until... I don't remember his name. There's a guy,
Bob.
Vince Misra. No, his name is Misra, is his last name, that actually created a paper that implemented the fictitious
the
middle-out compression. Yeah, optimal tip-to-tip efficiency is the name of the academic paper that was published.
Four at a time.
Which is just, but I guess it was not like...
Do we want to have a serious discussion about this or not, Paul?
Yeah, I'm trying to keep it serious.
This academic paper on middle out is a serious discussion.
It is a serious discussion because it was basically like it doesn't really do better compression than the algorithms that are available now. RAR being the commercial algorithm, which is not open source. The other ones we talked about are, in fact, open source. And I think one thing to note about compression that we were talking about before the show is, and I think bzip might be an example, it's slower to compress the file, do the compression, but faster to decompress it. So if I'm distributing software, I put out one file that maybe I had to wait a long time to compress, but it got really small so people can download it with less bandwidth, which was more of a concern 20 years ago.
And then they can extract it really fast.
And they can extract it really fast because there's multiple people extracting it, but only one conceivable person that has to create
kind of like what we used to see with some of the older USB thumb drives, that it would take forever to copy a file to a USB thumb drive, but to copy it from the thumb drive to another system was like super fast.
Right. So when we were talking about last week, I think the various performance aspects of the compression algorithms, the limitations, and the licensing, gzip, bzip are open source implementations based on open source kind of algorithms.
I need to go read that paper because I wonder if the middle out compression would benefit from doing 4 threads at a time.
Right. That's a sense.
Like, in the traditional sense of the middle out encryption, right?
Right.
Or middle out.
In that context, it's not necessarily a thread, but it's part of the algorithm as to how it does.
Right.
You got to go watch I think it's the end of season 1 of Silicon Valley. It's an older show now.
I just remember I spent
the funniest moment for me, the funniest moment ever on television as a nerd. Like that was just, I was rolling on the floor laughing.
I thought it was unlocking the component vault, but whatever.
No, that was the horror. I remember watching that as a kid. Now that you say that, you brought up one of the most worst moments of television, awkward moments in television. Geraldo Rivera.
I used to spend a lot of time looking into compression 20 years ago, and it was a big deal back then, and how it was done and the algorithms. Yeah. I did a lot of research on it 20 years ago, so I don't remember that much about it because it was 20 years ago. But back then, the concern was bandwidth and storage capability. Right. And we were transferring data over modems, and so data compression was a huge. The different algorithms, the different methods for doing it was a big deal. And
how spoiled are we today where we can do a pip install something and it's like, oh, I just need to download this 239 megabytes extra. And you're like, yeah, sure, go for it. It just happened.
I was thinking about this earlier. I can attach a file that's 10 megabytes and send it to you today.
Right.
25 years ago, that was the hard drive size.
Yeah, right.
Yep.
So yes, we are spoiled today.
I was going to say my first computer got upgraded with a 33 megabyte K-Lock 5.25-inch hard drive.
In fact, I would say our data compression these days, I don't know that it's the issue that it was 25 years ago. I think it's more it's just an easier way to send a bunch of files. And most people probably don't even care about whether it's compressed or not. They're just trying to. I have to copy a whole bunch of files.
It
depends on the application.
There's still opportunities where compression is hugely beneficial, even with the bandwidth that we've got today. Like, I think about some of the files that I get to deal with on a fairly weekly basis. Like, here's a virtual machine image. It's 60 gigabytes.
Yeah.
Compressed.
Right.
Yep.
Do I download 60 gigs or 200 gigs?
Gosh, I can remember there used to be a tool.
Here's terabytes of firmware from no unnamed manufacturer that we want to download.
That reminds me, I have to bring a hard drive for you.
I remember looking at something, and again, it was probably 20 years ago, more than, but it would rate the different data compression algorithms and tell you the percentage,
the best one to use
of compression. This one's only compressing 90%. This one's compressing 70% of it.
There's a rate of compression and speed for both compression and decompression. So I think there's 3 factors.
So that's still a thing.
Yeah, certainly.
All right.
Anyway,
hey, I want to hear about
my story number 5.
No, I want to hear about one of Sam's stories.
Yeah.
There's actually 2 of Sam's stories that I thought were interesting. But I'm going to set you up for another story that I'd love to hear about.
Sure.
Sam, your story number 14, the fake signal app by China-linked hackers.
Yeah, I was pretty surprised to find this because, I did a lot of Android security audits, and this is the one vulnerability that everybody always ignored, is you can make a fake app that will interact with the server. And this signal app connects to your signal and sends an extra copy of your signal messages to a third account without telling you. And it seems to me like that's a serious design flaw in Signal, although I don't understand all the technical details from this article. But you shouldn't be allowed to connect to the Signal messages without running the genuine app.
Yeah, but are they just basically getting the user's keys and proxying those? So really isn't any application vulnerable to this, Sam?
Well, I know the NFL app is not.
What's an NFL app?
National Football League.
Like the football?
Oh, okay. I thought you were talking about like a different file format.
Talk
We
to
were talking about compression algorithms. Like NFL, a new compression algorithm.
Tim Medine, Sans Instructor, had some experience with the NFL app and stuff back in the day.
In the Android hacking class, we modify Android apps, and then they cheerfully talk to servers at banks and insurance companies and stockbrokers, and that should not be permitted. You should verify the signature before accepting any signal from an app, and then tell them, no, you can't use this app, you have to update to the right version. It's not that hard to do. So
no,
it seems
I agree. Well, in that context, Sam, of an Android app, there are security companies that are geared towards the app creators that give them a tool set to provide integrity to their app so the attackers can't do exactly what you described. And I think usually they get that functionality from a third party. I'd be remiss to remember what the names of those companies are called, right? But like if I'm a big bank, I would go to this company and I would license their software, and they go, yeah, when you make an app, you can do all these things to make sure that those attacks are invalid.
Yeah, those tools exist. One of them is -O, but I did the audit. I found that nobody bothers using it. Not any of the top 10 insurance brokers or stockbrokers do it, even though they should. And when I reported it, they don't care. They don't think that someone would make a fake version of their app, but that totally has happened here.
Yeah. You could extrapolate. I don't think this is Signal's fault necessarily, but you could do this with anything.
Well, I think that a fake app should not be able to communicate with the Signal network.
Right.
Do they have an API?
Is Signal really a network?
Well, that's
I
what
guess I don't know how Signal works.
No, they do. Well, it is in that they store. I don't pretend to know exactly how it works, but they do store a very small amount of data and the authentication to tie
like key exchange. They're like a.
It's like they only
HSM
store
type
like
of thing?
your number, your phone number, and something cryptographically tied to that number, and that's
so a
it.
signature or a checksum or something like that.
They don't store any personal information about you, but they store very minimal. When Moxie was still at Signal, he did an interview
So
with
the
Joe
security
Rogan,
of Signal is tied to the individuals. They're not looking at the app at all.
largely from what
if they're getting a message with the right kind of stuff in it, they're processing it. That's what I'm hearing.
Yes, there's a lot of podcasts that talk about exactly how Signal works and what makes it so awesome and unique. And they do have servers that are processing data, but it's a very small amount of data that isn't tied back to the individual and things like that. I don't pretend to. I think security, cryptography, whatever, might have done some episodes on it. And there's some other I know Moxie went on Joe Rogan and talked a little bit about, not as technical, but yeah.
So, Sam, to talk about some of your stuff about you shouldn't let a rogue Signal app connect to Signal, the Signal network, we're going to call it. Arguably, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Go
ahead.
Looking at this article, we're a little light on the details, but what I'm gathering from this article was that it looks like the fake app implements a front end where you type your messages and you receive your messages in plain text, which then passes it to the legitimate Signal app, which then sends it into the network using all of the Signal properties you've come to know and love.
Interesting.
So it's like a front end, a secret front end to Signal that sends.
It's a wrapper.
Yeah.
That be fronting.
Totally. So that's sort of the way that I read it. So the real Signal app in this case is connecting to the Signal network. We're deeming it here, for lack of a better term. But there's a layer in front of that that's being able to intercept those messages, but after they've been decrypted.
Yeah.
So Google Play is at fault here for letting it on the store.
Well,
that's a fair point, Dimitri. It's fair.
Yes. The Google Play has always had a ton of malware in it.
It's not on the Apple Store. It's just the Google Play Store.
Yep.
Much less on the Apple stores, because they punish you very severely. You lose your privileges of publishing apps, and you have to tell them who you really are. And that's enough to really scare people away.
Interesting.
And there's money in iOS apps. So people really are not willing to put up malware and lose their privilege of publishing apps.
True. So, Paul, I kind of set you up for your story, number 7, I believe it was.
Oh, IoT module debate about security, competition, or xenophobia, which is basically the fear of the unknown or foreign entities, right?
Yep.
So, in other words, what I kind of gathered,
or the Chinese in this
yeah.
case.
But so what I'm kind of,
I don't know anything about X, so I'm afraid of it.
yeah. And so what I'm gathering is the premise of the article is there has been legislation that has banned Huawei devices from certain things because they're manufactured in China,
and some issues with or some embargo on DJI and those types of things, because they're effectively companies that are Chinese that are effectively owned by the Chinese government.
And but what this article is saying is that there's a lot of other hardware that is manufactured and comes out of China.
Yep.
So Chinese smartphone vendors like TCL and OnePlus, which continue to sell phones to the U.S. market, nor do they cover Apple iPhones, many of which are manufactured in China. So what the article is saying is basically either ban it all or don't ban it at all. But where we are now is some middle ground where we're well, that Chinese manufacturer that's producing that particular hardware is really bad, but these other ones are totally fine. But what you're saying is you're afraid of stuff that's manufactured in China, that it could be backdoored and compromise the security of U.S. entities. And they're all saying that doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
That's fair. Actually, kind of a fair point.
It doesn't not make sense.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, I think we get where you're going. It's you got to ban China or you got to not ban China.
Yeah.
But I think there's
a middle ground where
I think you have to look at what, and this article is all over the place for the record, because they talk about 3 dozen chip manufacturers and they're bounced back and forth between all of them. So it was really hard to follow. But I get the point in that there's a bunch of Chinese manufacturers, and this is in a cellular modem arena specifically.
Yeah,
so
it is
specifically
right, yes.
relating to cellular modems in various capacities in IoT and consumer cellular devices, and you name it. But not all of the devices in China are backdoored, because there are the companies in China are arguably independent companies that
arguably
that are doing their own thing, and then all of a sudden there's a level of success, and there's an opportunity for the Chinese government potentially to come in and say, hey, you want to continue doing business? Start putting some backdoors in your stuff so we can get access.
Correct.
And then the answer is, well, I like money. Do you like money?
Or I like what little freedom I have being in China, and if I say no, I'm going to end up in the gulag. Is the gulag the Chinese thing?
What?
No, that's the Russian thing.
Is that Russian?
That's
a Russian
yeah.
thing.
Whatever. You're going to end up in not a good place.
Ballpark, yeah.
You and your family may not end up in a good place.
Right.
But in any case, regardless of whether or not they issue any of those types of threats, the government could potentially step in and say, you want to continue doing business, you're going to do this thing. Or
I guess my point is there
down.
could be penalties above and beyond. You're not in control of your business anymore.
Correct.
Which also drives
and that
I'm going to put
ultimately-
a back door in whatever they're telling me to put a back door in.
because I like to continue doing business.
Because I'm DJI.
which it's unfortunate that we have to think like that, but I think it's pragmatic. But we could also make that same argument at some level against U.S. companies.
Oh, absolutely.
Absolutely.
And any companies in any other country, for that matter.
So, what's the next story we want to talk about?
So,
Next story.
and that said, and Paul, I wanted to hear your take a little bit on this, if you don't mind, before we move to the next story, because I can't necessarily comment on this one right now. But give me a couple of weeks, and I will comment when it's a matter of public record.
I think the official statement is it's very political.
Mm-hmm.
And not based necessarily on threats, risk, and scoring it and evaluating it. It is largely based on politics weigh heavily into the topic that we're addressing now. That's how
I will also argue that money.
Yep.
Well,
weighs
I was
heavily.
I was going to say
politics and money go hand in hand.
I was going to say politics in this context is really a euphemism for money, for economics. Not,
because money can drive politics.
Not as much national defense, national security. It's much more an economic thing.
If you guys stick around after the show, I will happily have a conversation between us girls.
Sure.
I want
to talk one of my stories.
Okay.
Can we change gears a little bit?
Yeah, let's change gears.
PCI.
Well, it'll get there because it always
The Phoenix
does.
Project.
The Phoenix Project.
The pit.
So a couple weeks
Did you
ago,
finish the Phoenix Project?
I did finish the Phoenix Project. I committed to finishing it because I knew Dimitri was going to show up today, and we were going to talk about it.
You're welcome,
But-
guys.
So I got an email a
It's all
couple
good.
weeks ago inviting me to a CISO book club, and they'd send me a copy of the Phoenix Project. I'm like, okay, if somebody's going to send me a copy of it, I'll get it.
Is
and
the
I'll read
CISO
it.
book club in any way, shape related to the Cybersecurity Canon project?
I have no idea because
There was some discussion about that.
I wrote them back and said, okay, I have the book. Now what? Can you give me the details about the actual book club?
Oh, man.
And I haven't heard anything.
I got the same email, actually. Now I'm thinking about it.
Did you?
Yeah, I absolutely did.
So I'm like, I have no idea what the book club is, but I got the book and I read it.
So wait, have you? So now you got to read the Beyond the Phoenix Project.
Yeah. Well, you
listen to it.
got to listen to it.
You gotta listen
The book
to it.
is not as good.
I agree. You got to
to it.
listen to it,
You said that. Listen
Yep.
to it because it's more.
and
of
then
an
you got to
interview.
read.
But do I
Well,
really?
so
have
is it
to?
DevOps Handbook next, or is it the Unicorn Project?
Or do you go back to Gold Rat? Do you
And
listen to the
so the
goal,
goal-
and Beyond the
and the-
Goal?
Well, the addition of the Phoenix
And
Project
then the
I got
Unicorn
has
Project?
got the DevOps Handbook in it, or
Yeah.
at least the first.
it's got the
4
first
chapters.
Yeah, those are the first few chapters. Yeah.
But here's my problem with the Phoenix Project. They set it up as it's a fictitious company, and then, as I'm reading the early chapters, I'm like, oh yeah, this is. I know I've been.
I've
been to this company dozens of times.
Yeah,
not,
yeah.
Not
This
a big
week.
deal.
Right.
But they said that they were a manufacturer, but they were also a retailer, and I'm like, okay, so they have to do PCI. That was like in the first couple pages, and to their credit, like by page 40, 42, something like that, they're talking about one of the early chat. Not to do spoilers.
Most people have read it. by now. You're late to
I'm
the
thinking
game.
I'm the last person to read the book, but just in case. So
Well, clearly not if the CISO book club is giving it out to a whole bunch of folks.
early on, it's painting the picture. This guy gets a job.
There's
as
a whole organization that hasn't read the book that we
VP
talked about
of
earlier.
IT operation. That's true.
My organization recently did.
There's all sorts of problems, and they're just going on and on. And to top it all off, the PCI auditors are due to show up in a couple weeks. So I'm like, okay, well, they're not auditors, but whatever. Everybody makes that
They're
mistake.
QSAs.
But at least they mention PCI,
What does QSA stand for?
Qualified Security Assessor.
Assessor.
Okay.
So they're assessors, not auditors.
Correct. And there's a difference.
All right. Well,
But
maybe
you
next time we'll talk about the difference.
But
Where are we going with this?
well, where we're going with this is they mention PCI sporadically through the book. It came up every couple of maybe 6 times it's mentioned. Usually it's the PCI auditors are coming, the PCI auditors are here. They got into some like really nonsensical thinking about PCI. And one of the things that was one of the statements that I remember, and I have it earmarked in my copy of the book, they talked about, they paint themselves as a $4 billion manufacturing company that also has a retail arms, and they do car parts. So think like AutoZone or something like that.
O'Reilly.
Pep Boys.
So I'm
there's
like
3 or 4 of them right on the main stretch in my
right.
town.
So
Yeah.
it's a fictitious company, but I'm like, okay, so they're a $4 billion company, and they operate retail locations, and so they have point of sale systems that they have to deal with, which are cash register to the lay person. They make some statement somewhere in it about when the Phoenix Project first rolls out. I guess this is somewhat of a spoiler. One of the many bad things that happens is at all their retail locations, something bad happens and they start leaking credit card data. And they're like, oh no, we're going to get fined. And if the auditors find out, we're going to be level 1 forever merchants. And I'm like, okay, while it's true a compromised entity gets moved to level 1 status, the fact that they have auditor, and this was written in 2013, it was published in January of 2013.
Yeah.
So it was written in 2012. So I'm probably the only one that cares about it. It was under PCI version 2. But back in those days, to have an auditor or assessor show up in the first place already meant that you were a level 1 merchant.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So
okay.
the fact that they're saying, oh no, this could make us a level 1 merchant forever, it's like, you're already a level 1 merchant. You're a $4 billion company.
If you have a QSA coming out, you're already a level 1
You're
merchant.
already a level 1. So
I learned everything I need to know about PCI from Jeff Mann.
And
I talk so intelligently about PCI in my day job. People are like amazed. I'm like, I'm just regurgitating what Jeff Mann told me.
you're welcome.
And they could do the same thing if they listened to the show.
Right.
They could.
Pretty much.
So, there was the other thing that was really weird about it was later on in the book, they're talking about all the improvements they're making. It's when they're turning the corner and they're starting to implement what is essentially DevOps, because the book's about DevOps. They talk about one of the reductions that they have in complexity and all the things they have to do is that they decide to outsource the point of sale systems of their cafeteria. So stop and think about that a minute. What company in the world that has a cafeteria, which happens a lot, maintains their own point of sale systems? I've never seen that. I've never seen that.
I've seen really poor security on those systems.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, I've been to many companies where because of their location, because of, employee morale, the time it takes to go get lunch.
Because, wait, hold on.
Just set up a cafeteria.
I have a question.
Sure.
On a point of sale system, you're not supposed to display the full credit card number on the screen to the cashier.
To anyone.
To anyone.
Well, you're only supposed to display it to people that need to see the whole thing.
Right.
It
was displayed on the screen. I'm just going to say me had a screen capture grabber that was collecting credit card numbers.
In the early and 2013 was still pretty early on. There was still a lot of really bad stuff happening.
This was 07, 08, so yeah. Okay.
I mean, back in the beginnings, you would get a receipt that had the full card printed on it. And then they, PCI
Hey, where are we going?
about.
Did you have a story about this, or
I do have a story about it.
Okay.
I did tie it to a story, and the story is DevOps versus SRE, decoding the roles in the tech world. And in that article, they referenced the Phoenix Project. So that was I'm really wanting to talk about the Phoenix Project. My issue is, if they're that much wrong about PCI...
Where were you 4 years ago when we covered the book?
I don't know where I was, but... Well, I was there with the Jim Kim interview. I want to have him back.
That was the Unicorn Project.
Yes, it was. He was talking.
You were on the Unicorn Project interview.
Yes, I was there.
Because you were like, "Oh, Paul, you're just such fanboying," but it's.
And now he's seeing the light.
Because there's a lot. It's not a spoiler, but there's a lot of fan service in the Unicorn Project. If you're a fan of the Phoenix Project,
it pays off.
Yes.
Yep. Yeah.
Go ahead, Dimitri. You want to interject?
So one of the things is, I think, well, for one, I think you're focusing on the wrong thing for the book, maybe. But I think one of the things is,
I agree. You're spot on. You're spot on.
But you get the feel that you're in a company, and you've seen these characters, these situations unfold. And again, in your experience, how often do you hear people refer to people as PCI auditors?
All the time.
All the time.
I'm called an auditor all the time.
Right. So this book is written to IT operations folks.
Right.
They're used to hearing that, even if it's wrong.
So hold on, time out, really quick. What other lessons did you learn from the Phoenix Project, to Dimitri's point? Because
and what else should we call you aside from old?
What I learned from the Phoenix Project,
thank you, yes,
is the overarching theme is all the different moving parts in an organization need to work together to meet the higher goals. There's goals for companies that supersede all the little fiefdoms that exist in companies. And trust me, I've been to dozens, if not hundreds, of companies where I've seen this played out. And maybe I'm naive. Maybe I'm.
Well, you haven't done Beyond the Phoenix Project yet, which I agree. Dimitri agrees with me. Really helps tie everything.
It really. You got a lot of history. There's Deming and all the of the work that this builds on with lean manufacturing and just everything else. I'll give it to you.
Because like my my takeaway from that, and I think you could apply this process to
Anything.
when I was running my running Security Weekly, but also in advising companies on their security architecture. The two big things for me were don't start a process till you have all of the pieces required to do that process. Right. That was something I learned from lean manufacturing. Like, don't start the assembly line if you've only got 20 of the parts, but you need 100. Like, don't start it yet. Like that, that kind of thing. Also, breaking the work up into smaller chunks was just huge for me. I mean, I applied that to my personal life and just managing a household, all the way to managing a company, all the way to managing a security program. Is like, let's just break the work up into smaller chunks. Like, and don't start it until you have all the pieces. Those were, from what I recall of those works, those are two of the things that stick with me. But it begs a revisiting, I think, to reapply it, because right. I mean, there's a lot.
So
of
like I've read the book. I've read the book probably 3, maybe 4 times at this point in the last 7 years, and it's amazing. Like, it's my go-to for like if I need a pick me up kind of a thing. If I'm like in a slump, and like every time I read it, I still get that hit of like, wow, that eureka moment, because I have changed, so I've seen different things.
Aha moment.
Okay. Aha moment. Yes. But I see, oh, hey, I could apply this lesson a little bit differently to this other situation I'm seeing. And it works. You keep being able to iterate on it and help others. Like I had probably 24 people I work with. I started like a little lending library at my office and got a whole bunch of people to read it. I've got like stacks of the book and Devops Handbook and the Unicorn Project.
So here's my takeaway from the book. And I'm trying to be objective
and brief.
I'll try to be brief too. I'm not known for that. But given that they got PCI all wrong, and I can get over that. One of my questions is, what else did they get wrong, and all the other things? And I certainly read it early on, Dimitri, and thinking, okay, maybe it's intentional that they're getting PCI wrong. I suspect it's not. But at the end of the day, the way organizations work better is if they have a big picture, they have a goal in mind, and everybody's working together. Everybody realizes that everybody's a component part. Yeah, I've been preaching that for the 27 years I've been in the private sector, and I'm willing to concede that because I came in with the mantle of auditor, nobody's going to listen to me. So if they need to hear it in a different way, if they need to hear it in a different form, so be it. I'm willing to concede that. I posted on LinkedIn yesterday or today, I think it was yesterday, something about the shift left. It's somewhat related to the Phoenix project. But I'm like, I just said, I really don't get shift left. Because shift left is, we need to move security earlier in the development cycle.
I heard shit left for a second there.
Yeah,
and I was confused.
Same thing. And I'm like, I don't get it, because it's been part of PCI literally since the very beginning. The very first publication of the standard in 2004 said incorporate security into every step of the development lifecycle for your software. So, and people have commented, it's been a concept for 50 years. But if people need to hear it in a different way, so be it. Because
people need to hear that pen testing is key for compliance.
We can move on to that.
Yes, because I got a lot of stories to cover, Jeff. So,
and not a lot of time to do it.
Yeah, but
get down.
So let's get down on it.
I did 2 articles in pen testing. The one I found that was talking about it's essential for PCI 4.0. I'm like, no, it's not. There's nothing really new.
Whoa, I disagree with the word essential. Either it's a requirement in the PCI DSS 4.0.
The article said it's key for compliance. It's key to meet your PCI.
But either it's required or it's not.
It's required.
And what requirement number in PCI DSS 4.0 is pen testing?
I don't have.
Is it still 11.3?
No, it's not.
It moves around.
They moved it.
You're going to have to relearn that fact.
Just as soon as I
learned it. All the numbers that you've learned from me
out the window
over the last 8 years are out the window. It's all been renumbered.
But it is still a requirement on a certain level of merchant?
All levels of merchants.
Yep.
It's a requirement. Now, the exceptions are for smaller merchants that only do certain payments a certain way, like e-commerce only type of thing. Depending on what their payment acceptance method is, they get different types of self-assessment questionnaires.
You're required to have a penetration test or a vulnerability assessment or both?
There is no vulnerability assessment.
It's not. It's a scan. Okay,
it's a vulnerability scan, or it's. Oh man, you're opening up a whole can of worms that we need to have a segment on. In PCI 4.0, there's what I think is going to be the biggest impact to the world is what used to be the short form of SAQ-A. That's if you're doing e-commerce only and you outsource your payment page to a third party. Sure. Basically, all you're doing in SAQ-A is validating that you're not keeping any electronic copies of card data, and you're not because you're not seeing it.
Right.
Everything in terms of payment processing is outsourced to a third party, so none of that traffic when a consumer's typing in information is traversing your systems.
So do you need a vulnerability scan in that point?
In version 4.0, they are now requiring a scan of your web server.
Okay.
So the example, and I'm not picking on this company. Money. I'm not picking on this company. It's not even money. It's so much more complicated. Shopify. They advertise that they have 4.3 million merchants that they're setting up and operating their web server and doing all the payment processing.
4.0 say if I'm a Shopify customer, I have to get my own vulnerability scan of my website to be PCI compliant?
Yes. That's part of SAQ-A in version 4.0. And because it's not a quote-unquote new requirement, there's not the grace period that's given when there is a new requirement. There's some number of new requirements in 4.0 that's best practice from April of 24, which is when PCI 4.0 becomes effective, to when you have to actually do all the new stuff, which is April of 2025. Because it's not a new requirement, you're not getting that grace period. So if you're an e-commerce merchant only, or if you're a merchant that has a segment of your operations that is e-commerce that you've segmented off and you're doing SAQ-A, you now have to have a vulnerability scan by an ASV of your web server.
But what if I'm selling stuff on Tindy or Etsy? Like, I don't have a website. My website is just a page on Tindy or Etsy.
So you got to take Etsy's attestation that says that they do whatever they do. Right?
So it'd be Tindy or Etsy that has to do the scan of their web server.
If you're selling stuff over Tindy and Etsy and you don't technically have a web server, you're probably not filling out an SAQ-A.
Yeah. Okay.
And there's a large portion, and if you go to the Shopify website, which I have, they say if you just do business with us, you're automatically PCI compliant. So they're not requiring their 4.3 million customers to fill out an SAQ-A. But that poses a problem because the new SAQ-A requires a vulnerability scan of the web server, and I doubt if Shopify is doing that today, and I doubt if they're willing to do that come April of 2024.
Yeah, that's interesting. But when does the pen test come in?
The pen test comes in, if you're responsible for all of the DSS, it's one of the 400 and some odd requirements. So if you're a large merchant and you're having an auditor show up to do the ROC, the report on compliance, pen testing is a requirement. If you're a merchant, it has to be done once a year, internally and externally. If you're a service provider, you have to do it twice a year.
So like a Square is a service provider? Is that fair? Okay.
Yep. If the, depending on
is this a special penetration test, or do you have to be certified to do this penetration test, or you got to have a pen test and have the report?
The pen test has to be done by a qualified pen tester. They don't really define all that.
Okay, so I don't as a pen tester, I don't have to register like I do to be an ASV.
Wait, well, it's weird, and they didn't clean up. If you have an external resource do it, that's a pen testing company, that's fine. If you're doing, you can do it as an internal resource. That's when it has to be a qualified resource, and they have to have organizational independence from whatever it is they're pen testing.
I got you. Okay. So I disagree that it's key for compliance. I think it's
it's not
a part
at all.
It's a part of the. You just explained how and why.
It's one of the many controls. And in theory, it's supposed to be, and this is the second article, which I thought was actually pretty well written, defining, the scope and the goal and the purpose of a pen test, which is, according to the article, and I would agree with it, it's supposed to be a test of your defenses. How well are you doing all those security things?
But from a PCI perspective, do you have to address all of the findings in the pen test report in some capacity?
In PCI, in the DSS, you have to, the pen test first is supposed to be attempting to exploit vulnerabilities, and you have to address all the exploited vulnerabilities.
Okay.
Now, loosely defined, exploited or exploitable, because in a pen test you don't always want to exploit everything, especially if it causes a denial of service attack. But in theory, a pen test in PCI should not be just another list of vulnerabilities. It should be a list of vulnerabilities that were exploited or exploitable. And loosely defined, it means, according to the CVE score, there's known exploits in the wild. Somebody really could do something with this. Those are the things that have to be addressed in a pen test for PCI.
Yeah, it's interesting. We talked a little bit about compliance and regulatory standards this week in a webinar that I did. And I drew parallels from PCI with CMMC. I don't know how familiar you are with CMMC, but it seems like they define tiers of contractors, very similar to how PCI defines tiers.
We used to talk a lot about it on security and compliance weekly.
But there's a difference, though. So this is the thing that's kept being in my head. So please correct me if I'm wrong. It's been a while since I've operated in a PCI regime. But my understanding was no matter what level of PCI compliance you were, you had to comply with every single control. The difference was how strictly they check you. Is that still the case?
Similar to the Phoenix project, that's kind of not right. If you're subject to PCI, you're subject to PCI, all the controls, period.
Okay.
What they do though in the self-assessment questionnaire world is they do take out, if you're only doing e-commerce, if you're only a brick and mortar, a retail merchant where you've got a point of sale system that's like on a phone line. I don't know if anybody has that anymore, but probably in the Midwest they do. It's not connected to the network, but when you're swiping the card, it's going right over the phone line to get the authorization. Or if it's an internet-based, but it's a payment application that's directly connected and doing the authorization, whether it's a web application or not, there's different variations that give you the ability to fill out a self-assessment questionnaire that takes out all the requirements that they realize aren't really applicable for that specific payment acceptance method. But on paper, they would say anybody that's subject to PCI is subject to all of the PCI requirements. The part of the misunderstanding is the idea that there's different levels of compliance. That's not really true. It's you're responsible for reporting compliance with all of it, but they will allow for the fact that there's certain things that don't apply, so they give you these self-assessment questionnaires that take out the stuff that doesn't apply already. That's the difference.
And I think again, I'm really familiar with like FFIEC stuff in the banking world, and that's another one I think similar to CMMC, where it says, okay, if here's your risk profile, and now you need to comply with this kinds of controls. And as your risk profile increases, so does the controls you need to maintain compliance. So those kinds of like stepping up and getting to a better maturity as far as compliance and everything, I'm actually a huge fan of those. It's funny because I think 2 years ago I said I hate compliance, but now I've learned to love some of it.
Well, I think overall compliance is getting. I want to separate industry compliance from government regulation, which there's similar ways in which they're implemented, but PCI is an industry standard, whereas we delve into CMMC.
Well, for reference, my article number 5 talks about the difference between frameworks, standards, and compliance.
Everyone should read your story number 5.
Yeah.
Agreed. If you like that, because that's essentially where I'm going.
And it's like frameworks, and it lists a bunch of things.
But it's
standards, and it lists a bunch of things.
You know
And
what-
then compliance, it talks about, well, if you're bound by law to follow
Right.
certain things, that's compliance. That's how they define it.
Defined by, bound by law is different from I can't get this contract because I'm not compliant with this standard.
Right.
And that's could be PCI. But PCI is different in that it's not I can't get this contract. It's I may succumb to fines to
Right.
be a merchant to do transactions.
Right.
In the case of CMMC, as an example, I can't do business with the federal government or its contractors because I'm not in compliance. And I think that the trend
and there's very few regulatory compliance standards out there that if you don't follow them, you're doing something illegal.
Not all of them
and you're
have
subject to
teeth.
fine. Not all
Right.
of them have teeth.
But I think that
GDPR, and it's not even U.S. based, but
has some teeth.
But it has some teeth.
Right.
And PCI, I don't know that there's much other than
Well,
those.
the CMMC will have some
Will,
teeth. Will
maybe, will,
exactly,
maybe.
exactly.
But it's not even a legal thing. It's still you get to do
It's not a
business.
legal thing.
You
You're
get
correct.
to do business or you don't. It's
Right.
in that
Correct.
other category that you're highlighting.
But where I'm seeing a trend, and largely this is where I'm focused, is I'm working with my team at Eclipsium to break down these things into related to firmware and software supply chain security. And there's a lot. So we just covered it today in a webinar where executive orders come into play, NIST creates standards, and there's regulatory standards that also are trying to dictate. Again, not all of them have teeth yet, but they're moving in the direction of you have to attest to the supply chain of your software in order to sell it into the federal government. You
Right.
have to pay attention to firmware security.
Right.
If you want to be compliant with this standard, and we see it moving in the direction. OMB memo is another one, and I don't know what how much teeth it has yet, but France also has a similar regulation.
OMB. I
have to look at my slides.
I literally had to
Office
say,
of Management and Budget?
Correct.
Yeah, but I literally had to talk about one of these things today.
2218, is that it? Is that the
The one
all
that
kinds of numbers and acronyms.
the one I'm familiar is 524B, which is healthcare. FDA now finally has some teeth that if you want to
FDA has some teeth now.
Yeah,
Yes, that's another example. Yes.
So they've had some teeth, but they weren't allowed to open their mouth. Like it was only recommended that you do some things, but as of October 1st, now they have this whole bunch of things that you've got to do
if you want FDA approval.
And if you don't do these things, you get refused to accept an RTA, and you go back to the back of the line, which could potentially introduce a year into your approval process.
Right.
And a year addition to your development for medical devices.
You're killing it.
You got to get it right the first time.
But for the years that we've been doing the show and talking about all the stuff that organizations should be doing, I've contended, but they don't do it unless they have to.
Correct.
Right.
Correct.
Same thing with this 524B. Like the FDA is for a long time has been saying, you should be giving us these things. And now they have to.
Right. And it's not have to because they're going to get prosecuted for breaking a law or they're going to get fined. It's, no, we just won't let you do business.
Right.
Which is exactly how PCI was set up in the first place.
Yeah.
It's voluntary, it's private, and you can follow it or not, but if you don't follow it,
you don't get to do business.
You don't get to do business with whatever the particular card brand is. And it's economic in nature, and that's the bottom line, and that's where people sit up and listen.
Yep.
Why I've enjoyed doing PCI for 20 years is I've been going into companies, I was doing it 7 years before PCI, going into organizations in the private sector, trying to explain to them, no, you need to do this. No, you need to do this. You should be doing this. You should be thinking about this. And they're like, yeah.
Should
be doing, should. And then all of a sudden PCI came along and they're like, well, we don't understand security, but we know if it's PCI, we have to do it. So now we're listening. And so maybe it was convenient for me, but it was certainly convenient in the sense that now I could finally start having conversations with organizations and they would listen and they would actually do the things. So I am a firm proponent in regulatory compliance in this. Make it economic, because that's all that most organizations will pay attention to.
Yep.
And that's not a value judgment. That's just the practicality. That's the way it is. But that's the way you get. It's either that or they have a really bad day and then they pay attention.
Right, and then they pay attention.
And one is preferential over the other. Trust me.
Yep.
I wanted one of my coworkers had a great quote in an article that was published on Dark Reading by a guest on this show. Rob Lamos wrote the article, and Nate Warfield, who's also been on this show as well, and will appear on the next episode of Below the Surface podcast. And Nate's quoted in the article, and I love Nate's quote, and he and I've communicated. Obviously, we work together, so I've been.
Which story of this is yours?
So my
Paul?
story number 5. So let me put the context around this article. Motherboard mishaps undermine trust and security, and this was basically a bug in MSI. Go figure. That MSI and Microsoft are aware of the unsupported processor error and have began investigating the root cause. So Microsoft introduced an update that caused issues with certain MSI motherboards, right? And that was the premise. But the article delved into some of the other challenges that I've been working on at my time at Eclipsium. And Nate's quote in the article is saying, "We've got this multi-hundred-billion-dollar-a-year industry to secure everything above the firmware."
Mm-hmm.
So for attackers, if it costs more to spread to the operating system or application, they're going to find the places where it takes less technical investment to evade security controls. And that is going to...
Below the firm. Or the firmware or
below the operating system.
Yeah.
Below the
Bad
surface.
guys are like water. They follow the path of least resistance.
Right.
Yep.
So on LinkedIn, I posted this. I said, I believe that there's insufficient focus on detecting and preventing privilege escalation and persistence, especially at the firmware level. Too often, we just hand these wins over to attackers, allowing them to escalate privileges higher than root or administrator and persist at lower levels with little resistance. Yeah, attackers shouldn't be there in the first place, but we all know that's not a reality. Yet, on the flip side of that, we go, I can't deal with the firmware or the supply chain security problem, all the components in my systems, because it's just such a daunting task, and I've already got all these other things that I have to do with patching, with log and event management, with moving to the cloud, with cloud security and application security and EDR. I'm like, well, all that stuff is great. I'm not saying you shouldn't do all that stuff, but this problem that lies below the operating system should be an equal priority to all those things, because once an attacker gets on your system, if you allow them to evade all those other controls, then where's the control for that attack vector, right? Like they're just undermining EDR, for example.
But I agree with you, but is it reasonable to put that on the end user, or should there be some sort of regulatory compliance requirement for the firmware vendors to be on top of it? Isn't it reasonable for me as a consumer? I'm an organization that buys stuff that has firmware in it, that I expect the firmware to be protected and secure.
So what you're saying is everything that's delivered to you as a consumer should be perfectly secure when you get it. If that was true, Jeff, we could all retire and go home.
And by consumer, I'm not talking about individuals. I'm talking about corporations, organizations, enterprises.
If everything that was delivered to the enterprise was perfectly secure, and perfectly secure from not just the time you bought it, but moving to the end of time, we could all go home. We don't have jobs anymore. We can retire. We can go play. It's not tennis. It's not tennis. What's the other? Pickleball. We can all become awesome pickleball players.
Next week's episode is going to be pickleball.
That's right.
I'll bring the pickles.
Nothing is delivered to you.
It's a reason, and I'll bring peace.
But why put that requirement of, well, firmware should be delivered to me in a perfectly secure state, but other software doesn't have to be. Firmware is just software. Inconvenient to program, but firmware is just software. If it wasn't software, it would be hardware, and when it was vulnerable or something, you'd have to replace it. The reason it's firmware is that we can update it.
Yeah. And I think we all know that that's not really happening these days.
Hence, we need to treat firmware and other supply chain issues and the components of the systems that we use, just like we do any other software and any other controls.
The we who.
Yes, the manufacturer should strive to
Ding,
deliver things
ding,
more
ding, ding,
secure.
ding, ding. Yeah.
IoT manufacturers certainly fall
Ding, 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 ding,
in this,
ding.
but also us as enterprises, as consumers, also need to treat it as such as well. I mean, we put EDR software on our systems because we know attackers are going to get on there. We want to
And
detect.
what is going to compel any of the individual members in the we collective to do that?
Federal regulation.
Right. One thing is
That thing
is
that we all
compliance.
hate.
The thing we all hate, compliance and
Yep.
GRC is an overarching term,
Yeah.
right? Is one thing, right?
Well, I don't even think it's GRC, but that's a whole different conversation. But I think it only happens if and until there's a compelling reason to do it, which is going to be mostly economically based. It's got to be cheaper to do it than not do it. I mean, and a good analogy, I think it's a good analogy, is, think of the history of the automobile and the safety features that have been added to automobiles over time. When I was a kid, there were no seat belts.
Right.
There were definitely no airbags.
And child seats.
There were no. I remember going to the beach as a kid in the family station wagon, and I was the youngest of 4, and so 5 people were sitting in the 2 seats, and all our luggage and all of our stuff for the beach was, the back seat was folded down. It was all put in there with a blanket on top, and I was lying on top of the blanket.
I can remember that and I don't remember specifically, but I remember many years later that my car seat was a hammock that hung between the 2 hooks in the back seat where you were to hang your clothes.
Right? Nice. I've never seen that, but that sounds amazing.
Yep, it was a hammock.
But my point is, in the evolution of the automobile safety, seatbelts didn't just come around because, oh yeah, that's a good idea. We should do that. It was over time.
Adding seatbelts will really save lives for our customers. That'd be awesome. That'd be an awesome thing to do. We should probably do that.
And then it was lap belt versus over the shoulder,
And then the automatic ones.
There was a time in
Mid-90s, early 90s, mid-90s, the automatic ones.
But you're talking about the evolution of the defensive mechanism, not the evolution of the threat. The threat is still the same. A car crash is a car crash.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
In the terms of cybersecurity, the threats are a moving target. The threats are ever evolving. Ever evolving.
They are.
Unpack that a little bit.
The threats are not.
I agree and I disagree.
I mean, the threats are not static, right? I mean, what we're trying to defend and
the
what we're
bad
trying
guys,
to attack.
Well,
the bad guys, I think, are static. Maybe it's a different group or a different nation state or a different whatever. The attacks, the things that they do, which is now what we commonly call threats, do change over time, mostly as a function of all the new technology that comes about.
Correct. The
But-
ever-changing attack surface.
I think Dimitri's got a good point here.
So if you take it back to the car analogy, which I love, by the way, I use it all the time,
Mm-hmm.
and like the car crash is a car crash, but a car crash in like 1910s, you're going 25 miles an hour.
Mm-hmm.
Nowadays, you're going way faster. So
But there's a speed limit to me.
there's a speed limit, yes,
But not everybody follows it.
no, well, yeah,
Not even me.
but the landscape can change, and like safety regulations have, maybe not regulations, but like the IHS safety like scores or whatever, all the different crash tests that they do. That's the analogy of the threat landscape changing. The manufacturers have to keep up with, oh crap, we got to do the small overlap test to protect the driver on a head-on collision or whatever. That's it changing.
Yep. Oh my gosh, the big vehicles are so much bigger now.
Right.
Right. We need to.
So
Yep.
the analogies, I mean, you're not wrong. I mean, we've been building cars for over 100 years, and we're just now getting to the point where they're really kind of safe, I would say. And how long have we been doing computers? Nowhere near that long.
Right.
You know, like all the industries that are very well regulated.
But crash is really just one bad outcome or
It's
impact.
one risk.
It's one. Is it a risk?
Mm-hmm.
Risk of a crash, but also there's risk of a theft of a car as well. that
It's
you
the
have to protect
likelihood
against.
of a crash. The risk is to bodily harm.
Manufacturers will still get both things wrong.
Yeah.
I'll bring up his evidence point number 1 in Hyundai, not including an immobilizer in all vehicles sold in, well, at least in the U.S., but not in Canada. Get to that point. But in the U.S., no immobilizer. Second problem, they allowed a USB key to be the thing if you take apart the steering column to start the car.
Yep.
Still a problem today. Our good friend Kevin Finisterre was still on Twitter like, there's helicopters going over looking for basically the Kia boys because it's still a public threat. It's not even just a threat to the person whose car they're stealing. It's a threat to the person who's stolen the car because they're injured and or killed in some of these crashes. But it's also a threat to other people standing around that could be hit by these cars.
Or the other motorists.
Or the other motorists in other cars.
Or other
animals,
or law enforcement that are chasing them down.
It's a huge problem, right? And to speak back to regulation to help solve this problem, which I hate that we're coming back to regulation to solve the problem, but it is one thing that helps solve the problem. In Canada, you can't sell a vehicle in Canada that doesn't include an immobilizer. So the Kia boys problem doesn't exist in Canada because every car sold in Canada has an immobilizer. And that is enough of a deterrent to deter this particular threat. In the U.S., to save cost, Hyundai can go, we didn't include an immobilizer for 10 years because we wanted to save cost. And that causes huge problem. And there's lawsuits. I don't know if they've been settled or not, but there are lawsuits following that. Now, I mean, I hope we do get regulation in the U.S. to basically put this threat to bed, right? The threat of it ties into crashes, but also ties into theft. Insurance costs go up. There's a whole problem.
But all we have
Regulation
right
can solve
now
that.
is a bunch of vaguely worded executive orders that vendors are latching onto to try
In
to sell.
what you're saying
in
is in cybersecurity,
Right.
we do have.
We're not there yet.
But we're moving in the right direction.
But
The executive orders were important. There's been multiple.
Well-
Did you know that the NIST, why the NIST CSF was created?
No, why was it created?
In response, in 2013, response to a presidential executive order. President being, at that time, anyone?
Obama.
Very good.
In
Obama,
13?
yes.
Yeah.
So we're all in agreement that ultimately what moves us forward
Is regulation.
is regulation.
And PCI. And bourbon.
I would say no, but I would
Bourbon,
say
definitely bourbon.
I would say PCI.
Which I need some of.
I would say PCI is a case study because from 2004 on, it has been a voluntary regulatory requirement that addresses the economic aspects,
the wind, Paul.
which regulation necessarily needs to do in order to get companies to make the changes that we all think need to happen. Agree?
I'm sorry, I was pouring.
You're
Larry
pouring
was
bourbon.
pouring
It's the
bourbon.
most well known for sure.
It's the most well-known. It's the most prolific. It's been around for. Most of the Phoenix project ultimately boiled down to
Back to the
SOX.
Phoenix project.
It boiled down to SOX
How did we get back here?
404. Because you lift this book up as so transcendent.
It is, but you gotta get the right message out of it.
You've only gone down the first part of the path. You got to walk the whole path of the Jedi.
He even admits that he
Right
paints
now,
this-
you're just a Padawan. They're like first wielding around a lightsaber. And maybe
So there's more of this to come.
Yes.
Gene
Anyway.
Kim admits that he paints the security guy in a bad light, and he kind of regretted it, I think. Because the security guy has a little mental breakdown in the book.
Right.
He does.
Yes.
He has a big mental breakdown in the book.
Yes.
So,
But then again, this is not all that different from the goal, where the guy responsible for all the stuff has that breakdown.
It's
and
the
he
same.
goes in
It
and
mirrors the. Yeah.
No spoilers. He goes and parks on the cliff and has a bottle of bourbon with him and gets shit faced.
Wait, does the Phoenix Project follow a hero's journey? Joseph Campbell's A Hero's Journey? Oh. It kind of does, actually.
yeah, because
it does.
it
right?
does.
It does.
Yeah.
Right.
The trips to the manufacturing floor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's essentially a hero's journey, which was essentially a million works like Star Wars.
Right.
Was a hero's
Yeah.
journey.
I think you might have done a presentation or two about this.
I did. Yeah. Was Back to the Future also kind of a hero's journey? I feel like it was also a hero's
I
journey.
mean, you can make anything into a hero's journey.
Anything could be. But there's also that too. I mean, but that's the flip side of it. Anything could be a hero's journey. in any case.
Well, it's also the elements of writing a compelling story where there's the protagonist, the antagonist. There's the gosh, it's been a long time since I was in an English class. There's that critical moment where they have to.
That's a hero's journey.
Yeah.
The climax.
The climax.
It was, but a hero's journey is Joseph Campbell that studied the previous from philosophy. What did he study? Joseph Campbell studied a whole bunch of previous works and pulled out this common theme that is essentially, for us nerds out there, think about the plot to A Star Wars: A New Hope, which is essentially the same plot to The Force Awakens, but ignore that for a moment because it's the new canon. And think about this plot to A New Hope,
and it's made up of a bunch of elements in order.
That is, yes,
to tell
elements
in storytelling.
I go follow the weird guy on some journey that teaches me a bunch of stuff. Right, the weird guy in the Phoenix Project
and you
is
overcome
Eric.
and you overcome challenges.
Eric is the weird. Eric is Obi-Wan.
And you overcome challenges and you have some success.
Correct.
It's the Karate Kid.
And you end up being the hero, but you're reluctant to go on that journey. You live in some weird esoteric place like Tatooine.
Because you just really want to go to Tashi Station and get some power converter.
Or you want to get another flipper gizmo and with a different accessory.
Security. Does security through obscurity really work?
Nope.
It doesn't work.
Move on.
I don't. So
yeah,
it works.
You're painting that too lightly. Though,
it works for a period of time, I would argue.
It's not a. I feel like it's not a binary thing, like works doesn't work kind of thing. I feel like there are scenarios where.
What story is this, Paul?
My story number 6. Like works, air quotes, works is a poor way to objectively paint the effectiveness or ineffectiveness of some type of security control. And essentially obscurity is a security control. Do we agree that obscurity is a security control?
It's certainly used as a
so think about.
So if I'm Fortinet and someone finds vulnerabilities in my firmware, and then as a result of that, Fortinet promptly locked down access to firmware downloads, limiting each account to the products with active licenses. As a trial user, you can't download firmware. That's my thing, but you can download virtual machine images, not the firmware.
So for what it's worth, I just checked. It doesn't lock you down just to the products that you have an active license for.
Interesting.
If
do you have to do some tomfoolery with the URLs or no?
No.
Okay.
But you have to have an active license?
You have to have it looks like, I admit, I use Fortinet at home.
So you have an active license?
I have an active license. I went in and checked when I read this. And let me download firmware for a device I don't have.
Okay.
Interesting.
But
so you've got to be a registered user with an active license.
But
it's still, but like the response sucks.
Yeah, the response sucks. It's still, regardless of the various levels and details in that, not anyone can go download a firmware image and evaluate that for security vulnerabilities and participate in a bug bounty program. Because, by the way, Fortinet on their own website says Fortinet does not operate a bug bounty program.
So the real inside baseball is that anyone used to be able to actually download a Fortinet image.
Anyone.
Not
you don't have to have an active license or an account.
Nope.
Nothing.
They took it away some years ago, but they had unrestricted FTP access, and you can just download anything you want.
You know what that does though? It makes security researchers want to look at the firmware for security vulnerabilities.
You put it behind a secret thing.
Yeah. What are you hiding?
I want to see
what are you hiding?
Never mind the man behind the curtain. Right.
Right.
Yeah,
what are you hiding?
Mind the man behind the curtain.
It was mostly a ploy to get people to pay for licenses.
Yep.
In my opinion. But
Could be. Well, I mean, I don't know if I necessarily pay for a license if I just want access to analyze all the security firmware.
No. I mean, for the people who are actually running the hardware,
you
could theoretically get new firmware even if you didn't have a contract.
You can't get that security update.
You couldn't get the security you couldn't get the security updates, but you can get the firmware updates in effect for free if you knew where to look.
I gotcha. Yep. So I guess my whole thing with story number 6 is I want to see Fortinet have bug bounty program, a well-constructed bug bounty program that provides people access to the firmware. You know what? I'd even be okay if Fortinet said, look, we're not going to make all the firmware public, but if you want to participate in our somewhat vetted bug bounty program, we'll give you access to all the firmware. Yep. I'd be okay with that too. That's fair.
And I'm not a lawyer, but I've talked to a lawyer about some of these types of things recently. And when you download the firmware, you sign a EULA that says you will not do any reverse engineering unless you're willing to submit to our bug bounty program.
Right. And also, I would imagine that EULA, it says you can't redistribute the firmware or like, hey, I'm just signing up for your bug bounty program so I can get all the firmware updates.
So I can put
I agree.
it,
Like,
so
if you have the gear, you should.
No,
I'm just signing
they
up so I
put
can
work
get the
into it. They
firmware.
deserve to be paid.
Yeah, I agree with that. I agree with that.
I'm just signing up so I can get firmware so I can put it on an FTP server out of Russia.
Right. Well, I mean, that's
How do you feel about The Matrix, Paul, if we want to, like, end on a lighter note?
like the movie or?
Yeah, the movie.
And this
I watched
was
it.
your
I watched
story.
it.
I had
recently.
my story number 8.
I had something else on bug bounty programs.
I'll do that because
I like the Matrix.
Related to bug bounty programs, I had something that
I was trying to find
my
a
story
way to
number
wrap.
my story number 9 is, and I recognized this person's like YouTube channel, Nahamsec. You guys know this person. You've seen this person. His name's Ben, and he goes by the handle Nahamsec. I think he does some stuff does a lot of YouTube, like cool YouTube videos. Seems to have a really good following. So Nahamsec published a YouTube video that used, and I watched the video, used ChatGPT to create a bunch of endpoint URLs that could be used to disclose information. Took those endpoint URLs in the video and said, hey, Ford Motor Company has a bug bounty program, and I'm going to show you how to use ChatGPT to generate some endpoints and go test it against a company that has a public bug bounty. That video is still posted to his YouTube channel, and I watched it. And it's a great video. It's a pretty cool technique. And from my assessment, he does some pretty cool stuff. And I gave it like a cursory look. But like I've heard of people that dig this person's content. So awesome. Nahamsec gets an email, I believe, from Rapid7, which is kind of like weird. Rapid7 is an international cybersecurity intelligence provider. Say we serve as agents for our clients to identify and neutralize active cybersecurity threats that endanger brand, customers, and employees. As legal representatives of Ford Motor Company, Rapid7 is a legal representative of Ford Motor Company because Ford Motor Company subscribes to Rapid7 in the capacity that Rapid7 offers a service for like attack surface management.
They do.
Right? Like what stuff are you publishing about a company? Ford Motor Company is our client. You publish something about Ford Motor Company. Therefore, we request that you take this video down. And the Nahamsec's like, yeah, no. Ford's got a public bug bounty. I didn't show anything that wasn't in scope in the public bug bounty, that wasn't already public and in scope, which is interesting. Casey Ellis got involved in this thread too. And message Rapid7 was like, yeah, this is kind of like weird. Like, could we have a discussion about this? Because like this is weird.
We should bring Casey on and talk about it. Then.
Yeah, absolutely.
But like, is this a Rapid7 problem, or is this this isn't Rapid7? This is just their product team.
I think this is auto. So my question, Dimitri, is like, how automated is, like, there's some engine that, and I don't want to pick on Rapid7 because I like Rapid7.
Yeah,
I like the people that work.
Any attack service management company.
Yeah, exactly. Like any company, Flashpoint, whatever threat intelligence company, attack surface management company, they're providing a great service to an organization. Like, look, I'm a company like Ford or any other Fortune 1000 company, let's say, and I want to know if the people on the internet or people that are trying to fly below the internet, I want to use dark web, whatever the term is, right, are talking about hacking my company, disclosing information about my company, doing things that I should be aware of from a security perspective, right? Monitoring Telegram. There's some like I was talking to one of my friends. There's some ridiculous statistic about how many millions and hundreds of millions of messages are sent on Telegram every single day. And if you're a large company, how would you monitor Telegram to see who was talking about, oh, I've got a list of user accounts for this organization? Well, no, I would go to a threat intelligence company and they would monitor Telegram. Therefore, I don't have to employ 3 full-time people to try and interface with the API of Telegram to go, who's talking about my company, right? That's essentially what's happening here. Some automated mechanism that looks at YouTube which YouTube is like, compared to Telegram, the amount of YouTube videos that are published and the amount of content that's already on YouTube is just
staggering.
It's unfathomable. Like, you could pull the statistics. We could go research it, right? But it's like,
does YouTube use data compression to store their videos?
I would.
They must.
There's compression and, but
is it middle
also, there's also transcoding that they do when you initially upload,
which
to
is
YouTube,
effectively
Jeff,
compression.
which is it applies to
On the fly.
compression.
Encoding is compression by
Right.
definition.
So, I mean, not having read the whole thread, but just the first few lines, it feels like this person's quarrel is not with Rapid7, with Ford.
But Rapid7 is allegedly acting as a legal agent of Ford.
agent of Ford. Correct.
Yeah. So like,
So arguably, it's that the argument was
my
Ford.
thing is,
so you're saying
my thing is
Rapid7
automated. It's my thing is it's automated.
It's totally
right?
automated.
Yeah.
yeah, sure. Like,
There's not someone at Rapid7 who's watching every single YouTube video that's posted,
Yep.
right?
They're using that ChatGPT plugin that Adrian recommended to summarize the videos, looking for.
And they're running that through an AI ML kind of engine.
looking for Ford.
Ford, right? They're setting up profiles. Ford.
Okay, so here, hypothetical. He gets a message from company XYZ. Hey, we're a threat intelligence company. We serve as agents for our clients to identify and neutralize, yada, yada, yada. Please take this down. Would it be getting as much publicity? Is it because Rapid7 is in there that, like, they're just, because they have the reputation that they have?
No, I think he would have posted this regardless of whoever was reporting it. It could have been Rapid7. It could have been XYZ. It could have been Ford. It could have been anyone that posted this. It would have been like, no, like, what I'm doing is not wrong. Whoever's pointing out what I'm doing is wrong, I have a dispute with, basically.
And
is what I get from the thread. I did read the entire thread. That's kind of the sense I get.
Yeah.
And it was hard to understand what was happening, and I had to read the whole thread to, that's what's happening, right?
Well, is he getting any additional, like, notices?
Not to my knowledge. The last time I read the thread, he was not. I did see Casey Ellis in there tweeting at Rapid7 going like, this is kind of weird. Like, maybe you want to just, like, take this back kind of thing. Like, I think it's basically what I'm saying is I think this is a false positive in their detection engine. And hopefully the story pans out where they're like, oh, never mind.
And Paul, you and I have experienced the whole deal with intellectual property, and that if the lawyers see something or if the automated process discovers something, they have to say something, because if they don't, they're not protecting the brand of the company in question.
For trademark, absolutely true.
Yep.
This is not so much a trademark thing. It says it operates illegally and is active in aiding criminals in their fraudulent activities. To me, that is not a legal precedent for intellectual property.
Agreed.
That is just this is aiding criminals in fraudulent activities, so therefore you should use a compliance thing, right? You should take it
against our Ford brand, which could be largely maybe construed as defamation.
Now they could report it to Google and say you should take down this video because it violates Google or YouTube's. Well, Google's the parent company.
Yep.
YouTube's the brand. It violates YouTube's terms of service, right?
Hacking videos.
For hacking videos and stuff like that. That would be a path for them to take it down. I don't know if they will or will not go down that path to take down this particular thing. My assessment is that it's set up to just notify the creator and go, yeah, you should probably take this down. Maybe there's a next step. Like maybe there's hopefully, my thought is, hopefully there's a manual review. Someone at the company like Rapid7, I'm going to pick on Rapid7, but someone at the company reviews this and goes, oops. The next step would be to report this to the content hosting provider and take it down. But there's a manual process to go, we're not going to
follow.
Like anyone will watch the video and go,
I mean, we were talking about this last week, but C&D that I got many years ago for a domain that I registered that had the word Walmart in it. And Walmart, because of their trademark and all that stuff, they have to reply to these types of things.
Correct.
And they did. And I responded as to why it could not be confused with Walmart and a number of reasons. And I never heard from them again.
Yeah.
Because, made a legitimate case. We're just not going to follow
They just have to file the complaint. Well, that's intellectual property.
Yep.
If you have a U.S. A trademark from the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office, part of your obligation to being the trademark holder is you have to defend that trademark. So if you observe violations of said or potential violations of said trademark, you have to address those if you want to maintain the trade. You could lose your trademark.
Yep.
It could become, basically what happens is it could become a public domain. It's no longer a trademark. It's just public domain because it's not being defended any longer.
That sounds like why No Starch Press is the one that's responsible for finding all the pirated copies of their books on Amazon.
Correct.
Yeah.
Rather than Amazon.
Yeah, copyright is different from trademark. I'm not an intellectual property attorney, but
it sounds.
I know
very
one. I know one.
And the annoying thing is that you have to be the holder to make a complaint.
Correct.
So like I see a whole bunch of stuff on various places, and I'm like, oh crap, I want to report this because I know this is like cloned from somewhere else.
Right.
But I can't because it has to be.
It has to be from the trademark holder.
Right.
Yes.
I'm like,
So you let the trademark holder
report it
know.
to the trademark holder,
I know.
who's obligated to.
There's no like
take
good
action.
Samaritan aspect of it.
There is not.
No.
From what I understand, again, I'm not an intellectual property attorney, but
a piece of advice: buy your books from No Starch Press's website directly.
yes.
Yep. Don't go to Amazon.
Yeah. And we should probably call it a night.
Yeah, we should wrap it up.
Oh, we need to do like a whole other show. I have enough stories to do like a whole other.
I know
show.
you do, which is glad.
That's why we're shutting you down, Paul.
That's right.
Carry a couple over for next week, the high priority ones.
Paul, now's when you should say, Larry, take us out.
Larry, take us out.
Hey, over and holy crap, we have more stories to cover, but we're not gonna out